The burlap sack hit Caleb Turner's porch with a wet thud that would haunt him forever. Blood seeped through the coarse fabric as the barefoot woman collapsed beside it, her fingers clawing at the rough material. "Please, take them off," she whispered, her voice breaking like dried leaves. Inside were 12 tiny shoes, each pair soaked in blood, each one a silent scream. This is the story of what happened when one rancher discovered the truth behind those shoes. Stay with me until the end and comment your city below. I want to know how far this story travels. The sun was dying behind Dustfall Ridge when Caleb Turner first saw her. He'd been mending the fence along the northern pasture, the kind of mindless work that let a man's thoughts wander to places they shouldn't go. 23 years he'd been working this land ever since Martha died, birthing a child that lived only long enough to draw 3 breaths. 23 years of sunrise and sunset of cattle and silence of pretending the emptiness in his chest was just the high-altitude air of Colorado territory. The woman appeared like a specter against the purple horizon, a dark figure stumbling through the sagebrush. At first Caleb thought his eyes were playing tricks. Wouldn't be the first time the loneliness conjured phantoms in the dying light. But then she picked herself up and kept coming. Her movement had the desperate quality of prey that knew the predator was close behind. Caleb set down his hammer and squinted through the dusty air. The woman wore what might have once been a blue dress, now torn and stained with something darker than dirt. Her feet were bare, leaving bloody prints in the sand. And she was carrying a sack that seemed to weigh more than she did, dragging it forward, with both hands leaving a furrow in the earth behind her. "Christ almighty," Caleb muttered, reaching for the rifle propped against the fence post. Not to shoot, though, these days, a man never knew, but because in this territory approaching strangers empty-handed was a good way to end up buried in an unmarked grave. He started toward her, his boots crunching through the dried grass. The woman saw him and tried to run, but her legs gave out 30 yards from his porch. She went down hard, the sack tumbling from her grip. It hit the wooden boards with that wet, heavy sound that made something primitive in Caleb's brain recoil. "Ma'am." He approached slowly, rifle lowered, but ready. "Ma'am, you hurt?" She was trying to crawl toward the sack, her fingers scrabbling in the dirt. Up close, he could see she wasn't old. Maybe 30, though whatever she'd been through had carved deep lines around her eyes. Her dark hair was matted with blood and dirt, and her arms bore the distinctive marks of rope burns. "Please," she gasped, reaching for the sack. "Please, take them off." "Take what off?" Caleb knelt beside her, but she'd already gone limp, her body finally surrendering to whatever had driven her this far. He checked her pulse, weak but steady, then turned his attention to the sack. The burlap was rough under his fingers, stained dark in places that were still damp. It was tied with a length of rope that had been knotted and re-knotted, as if someone had been opening and closing it repeatedly. Caleb's hands trembled slightly as he worked the knots loose. He'd seen death plenty in his 52 years, men shot over card games, women dead in childbirth, children taken by fever. But something about this sack filled him with a dread he couldn't name. The rope fell away. He pulled back the burlap. The smell hit him first copper, and corruption the scent of things that should never be. Then his eyes registered what he was seeing, and his knees did buckle just for a moment before he caught himself on the porch rail. Shoes, children's shoes. 6 pairs of them, ranging from tiny leather boots that might fit a 3-year-old to worn canvas shoes sized for a child of maybe 10. Each pair was soaked in blood, though the blood had different stages of drying, some still wet, others crusted brown, the oldest nearly black. Tucked between them was a photograph, water-stained and creased, showing a group of children standing in front of a schoolhouse. Across the bottom, someone had written in a shaking hand, "Find them." Caleb's stomach churned. He forced himself to look closer to really see what was before him. The shoes weren't just bloody, they were torn in places as if removed by force. One tiny boot had fingernail scratches in the leather. Another had a small embroidered flower on the side, now dark with stain. "Jesus!" He breathed, then louder, "Jesus Christ!" The woman stirred, her eyes fluttering open. They were green. Caleb noticed absently. Green like sage after rain. She focused on him with difficulty. Did you see?" she whispered. "I saw." His voice came out rough. "Whose are they? Where did they come from?" She tried to sit up. Failed. Tried again. Caleb helped her, propping her against the porch post. She stared at the open sack with an expression that made him want to look away. Mine, she said. 2 of them were mine. Emma and James. The others, she swallowed hard. The others belonged to children from town, from Colton's Crossing. Caleb knew Colton's Crossing, a mining settlement 2 days' ride south. He'd been there once to buy supplies, found it a rough place full of rough men. What happened to them? The woman laughed, a broken sound that had no humor in it. What happens to anything weak in this territory? They were taken, stolen, and these, she gestured weakly at the shoes. These are what he sends back. Proof of what happens to those who resist. Who sends them back? She looked at him, then really looked at him, as if measuring whether he could handle the truth. You live out here alone, 23 years. Then you don't know. You haven't heard what's happening in the settlements. I keep to myself. Lucky you. She coughed, specks of blood hitting her lips. His name is Silas Briggs. Used to be a lawman, or claimed to be. Now he's something else. He's got a camp up in the mountains, an old mining operation that played out years ago. He takes children, sells them, some say, though nobody knows for sure because none ever come back. Caleb felt cold despite the warm evening air. The law. What law? Her green eyes flashed with bitter fire. The nearest federal marshal is a week's ride away. The local sheriffs are either paid off or too scared to act, and Briggs has 20 men all armed, all as twisted as he is. So you ran. I tried to fight. She pulled aside the torn collar of her dress, revealing a neck rubbed raw by rope. They made me watch while they took Emma and James, 6 and 8 years old. They made me watch, and then they gave me this sack. Told me to carry it to every settlement between here and Denver, to show everyone what happens when you don't pay their protection tax. Protection from what? From them. She laughed that horrible laugh again. Pay us or we take your children. That's the deal. Only some of us didn't have money to pay. Caleb stood slowly, his joints protesting. He walked to the edge of the porch, looking out at the darkening landscape. In 23 years of self-imposed exile, he'd managed to avoid the worst of humanity's cruelties. He'd built walls of solitude and routine, telling himself it was what he preferred. But those shoes... How long ago? He asked, without turning around. 3 days since they took them. I've been walking since then. And you came here? Why, this is nowhere. I'm nobody. I saw your smoke. I couldn't walk anymore. I thought... She trailed off, then continued stronger. I thought maybe I'd die here, and at least someone would know. Someone would remember their names. Caleb turned back to her. What's your name? Or Marin. Marin Foster. I was the school teacher in Colton's Crossing. Can't teach children that aren't there anymore. He looked at the shoes again, then at the photograph. The children in the picture were smiling, gathered around a young woman who must have been Marin, though she looked nothing like the broken creature on his porch. They were just ordinary children, gaps in their teeth, cowlicks in their hair, clothes patched and repatched. The kind of children who should be learning their letters and catching frogs in the creek, not... You got any notion where this camp is exactly? The question surprised him as much as it seemed to surprise her. You're not thinking... I'm not thinking anything yet, just asking. She studied him. North of Colton's Crossing, up in the Sangre de Cristo range. There's an old mining road that leads to it, though it's mostly washed out now. The camp itself is in a box canyon, only one way in or out. They call it Perdition. Fitting name. Mr. Turner. Caleb Turner. Mr. Turner. You seem like a decent man, but you can't be thinking of going there. I told you 20 men all armed. I heard what you told me. He picked up one of the tiny shoes, a little girl's boot with a button missing. It was so small it fit in the palm of his hand. You say 2 of these were yours. Her composure, what little remained, shattered. Emma loved to dance. She'd spin around until she got dizzy and fell down laughing. James wanted to be a doctor. He'd bandage up the barn cats when they got in fights. Tears ran down her face, leaving clean tracks through the dirt. They took them right out of the schoolhouse. Middle of the day, just walked in and took them. And the others. Timothy Harlan, the baker's boy. Sarah and Lucy Chen. Their father runs the laundry. Little Robert Price, only 5 years old. She recited the names like a prayer. All gone. Caleb set the shoe down gently as if it might break. You need food, water, rest. I need my children back. Can't help them if you're dead. She looked like she wanted to argue, but exhaustion won. Caleb helped her to her feet, supporting most of her weight as they made their way inside. His house wasn't much 2 rooms and a kitchen furniture he'd built himself with more function than art in mind. But it was clean and solid, and the bed in the spare room had fresh sheets, even though no one had slept there in over 2 decades. This was meant to be a child's room, he said quietly as he helped her sit on the bed. Never got used for that purpose. Marin looked around at the bare walls, the single window facing east. Your wife died long time ago. I'm sorry. So am I. He fetched water and some bread, watched her eat slowly, mechanically, as if her body was demanding fuel despite her mind's disinterest. When she finished, he asked, These men, Briggs and his gang, they got any particular routine? Times they're vulnerable. Why? Just curious. She shook her head. You can't be thinking what I think you're thinking. 1 man against 20. I've faced worse odds. During the war. After it too, during the Indian campaigns. That was different. You had an army with you. Not always. He moved to the window, looking out at the darkness. Sometimes it was just me and whatever needed doing. Mr. Turner Caleb, I didn't come here to drag you into this. I came here to die, if I'm honest, to let someone know what happened before I gave up. Well, you're not dead yet. I might as well be. Without Emma and James, they might still be alive. The hope that flashed in her eyes was painful to see. You said Briggs sells them. Can't sell dead children. The words tasted like ashes, but he forced them out. Means they might still be at the camp. Or they might already be sold. Might be halfway to Mexico or California by now. Maybe. Or maybe they're still there waiting for someone to come for them. She was quiet for a long moment. You know what you're suggesting is suicide. I know what I'm suggesting is necessary. Why? Why would you risk your life for children you've never met? Caleb thought about the empty room down the hall, the one he'd built with his own hands for a child who never drew breath. He thought about 23 years of silence, of deliberately turning away from the world and its pain. He thought about those tiny shoes soaked in blood. Because somebody has to, he said finally. And because I've been dead for 23 years anyway. Might as well make my death count for something. Marin studied him in the lamplight. You're serious. Never been more serious in my life. You'll die. Probably. They'll kill you slowly. Briggs likes to make examples. He's welcome to try. She stood swaying slightly and crossed to where he stood by the window. I'm going with you. No. They're my children. And you can barely stand. You'd slow me down, get us both killed. Well, then what am I supposed to do? Heal, rest, be here when I bring them back. If you bring them back, when? She laughed, but this time there was something else in it besides bitterness. You're either the bravest or stupidest man I've ever met. Probably both. You don't even know me. You don't know these children. I know enough. He turned from the window to face her. I know that right now tonight there are children scared and alone, wondering if anyone's coming for them. I know their parents are either dead or destroyed with grief. And I know that if I don't do something, I'll have to live with that knowledge for whatever years I got left. And if you die trying, then at least I died trying. She was crying again, but quietly, tears sliding down her cheeks without sound. I want to hate you for giving me hope. That's fair. But I can't. She wiped her face with her sleeve. When will you go? Tomorrow night. Take tomorrow to rest, prepare. Strike the following dawn when they're least expecting it. You've thought this through already. Started thinking it through the moment I saw those shoes. She moved back to the bed, sat down heavily. Tell me about yourself, Caleb Turner. If you're going to die for my children, I should at least know who you are. so he told her. Not everything. Some wounds were too old and too deep to expose to a stranger, but enough. He told her about growing up in Tennessee, about joining the Confederate Army at 17 more out of geographic loyalty than conviction. He told her about the things he'd seen and done during the war, things that had carved pieces out of his soul. He told her about meeting Martha in a field hospital where she was nursing, how her kindness had made him believe he might be more than just a weapon. He told her about coming west after the war, buying this land with the last of his mustering out pay, and a loan he'd worked 3 years to pay off. About building the house with plans for a family, for children who would run through these rooms and fill them with laughter. About the day Martha went into labor, how the midwife had done everything she could, but sometimes everything wasn't enough. She lived for 3 hours after, he said, staring at something beyond the walls, held our son for 10 minutes before he stopped breathing, asked me to name him. I called him Thomas after my brother who died at Gettysburg. She smiled when I told her, said it was a good name. Then she asked me to promise to live, really live, not just survive, I promised. He laughed bitterly. I lied. You survived. That's something. That's nothing. That's just being too stubborn to die. Maybe that's what those children need right now. Someone too stubborn to die. He looked at her. Maybe. They sat in silence for a while, the lamp burning low. Finally, Marin asked, "Do you have a plan beyond just riding in and hoping for the best, working on it?" He moved to an old chest in the corner, pulled out a rolled paper. This is an old survey map of that area. Mining companies had them drawn up back in the 50s looking for silver veins. He spread the map on the small table. Marin joined him, studying the topographical lines. Here, she pointed to a cluster of markings. That's where perdition is. See how the canyon walls close in. There's maybe 30 feet of clearance at the entrance, then it opens up inside. Natural fortress. That's why Briggs chose it. The old mining buildings are still mostly standing barracks equipment sheds, even an old ore processing plant. Where would he keep the children? She thought. There's an old strong room where they used to store processed silver before transport. Solid stone walls, one door, no windows. If I were keeping prisoners, that's where you'd put them. Yes. Caleb traced the canyon walls with his finger. These cliffs, they climbable. You're thinking of going over instead of through. I'm thinking of considering all options. She studied the map. Maybe here on the south wall, there's an old goat path marked. But Caleb, even if you could climb it, you'd be exposed. One guard looking up at the wrong time. What about water? They have to have a water source. Creek runs through the canyon, comes from snowmelt higher up. Does it run year-round? Far as I know, why? He didn't answer, immediately studying the map. How many children did you say Briggs has taken total? From Colton's crossing 6, but there have been rumors of others from other settlements. So could be more. Could be. Or could be those 6 are all that's left. He rolled up the map. Either way, they're coming out of there. Caleb, get some rest. You look like death walking. I feel worse. He started to leave, then turned back. These children telling me about them. Not just their names, who they are. So she did. She told him about Emma's drawings, always of horses with impossibly long legs. About James and his collection of medical supplies, really just bandages made from torn sheets and bottles filled with colored water he called medicine. She told him about Timothy Harlon, who could already bake bread almost as good as his father's. About the Chen sisters, Sarah and Lucy, who spoke English and Mandarin and were teaching the other children Chinese words during recess. About little Robert Price, who carried a wooden soldier everywhere and made it have conversations with everyone he met. They're good children, she finished. They don't deserve this. No child deserves this. No, she agreed. But knowing that doesn't save them. No, Caleb said. But I might. He left her, then went to his own room, but didn't sleep. Instead, he cleaned his rifles. He had 3 accumulated over the years. He counted ammunition, checked his powder stores. He sharpened knives, tested rope, went through everything that might make the difference between success and failure. When dawn came, he was sitting on the porch watching the sun paint the mountains gold. The sack of shoes sat beside him, a reminder of what was at stake. He picked up the photograph again, studying those innocent faces. In another life, the one he'd planned with Martha, he might have had children in that photograph. Might have been the one teaching them their letters, watching them grow, protecting them from the world's cruelties. But that life died with Martha and Thomas. This life, the one he'd lived for 23 years, was just marking time. Maybe Marin was right. Maybe he was about to commit elaborate suicide. But maybe, just maybe, he could make his death mean something, could give it the purpose his life had lacked. Marin emerged from the house, moving stiffly but steadier than the night before. You didn't sleep. Don't need much sleep anymore. She sat beside him, wincing. I dreamed about them. Emma and James, they were calling for me. They'll call for you again, in person. You can't promise that. No, but I can promise to try. She picked up one of the shoes, a little canvas sneaker with a hole in the toe. This was Timothy's. His mother patched that hole 3 times, but he kept wearing through it, always running that boy. Tell me about Briggs, not his operation him. What kind of man is he? Marin's face hardened. The kind who enjoys fear. He could just take the children, but he makes a show of it, makes the parents watch, makes them choose which child if they have more than one. He made you choose? No. I only had Emma and James, and he took them both. But the Chens, he made their father choose, said one daughter could stay if he picked which one to give up. Mr. Chen refused, so Briggs took both and beat him nearly to death for his defiance. Where does he find men willing to do such things? Where does evil ever find servants? He offers them money, power, the chance to hurt others without consequence. For some men, that's enough. For too many men. They sat quietly watching the morning develop. Finally, Marin asked, What do you need from me? Information. Everything you can remember about the camp layout, the guards' routines, anything that might help. So she talked, and he listened, filing away every detail. Guard changes at dawn and dusk, dogs that patrolled the perimeter, the old mining tower that served as a watch post, the generator that powered electric lights, a new addition stolen from somewhere. Briggs sleeps in the old foreman's house, she said. It's set apart from the other buildings up on a slight rise. He likes looking down on everyone else. Sounds like him. You've known men like him before. Too many. War brings them out like rain brings worms. What makes a man become that? Caleb considered. Some men are born broken. Others get broken by the world. But some... He paused. Some choose to break. They see the darkness in life and decide to add to it rather than fight it. Which are you? All 3 probably, but I'm trying to choose different now. By afternoon, Caleb had formulated something resembling a plan. It wasn't much, couldn't be with so many unknowns, but it was better than riding in blind. You're going to burn it, Marin said when he explained. Burn the whole camp. Fire's a good distraction, and it'll cut off reinforcement from the barracks. What if the children are trapped? That's why I go for them first. Get them out, then light it up. And if you can't get them out, then I improvise. She shook her head. This is madness. Yes. You'll need a miracle. I'll need several. As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, Caleb made his final preparations. He loaded his horse, a sturdy mare named Bess, who'd carried him through 15 years of solitude. He packed extra ammunition, medical supplies, food and water for children who might be in no condition to walk. I'm coming with you, Marin said. We've discussed this. No, you dictated and I listened. Now I'm telling you I'm coming. You can barely ride. I can ride well enough. And you'll need someone to help with the children while you're fighting. Marin. They're my children, Caleb. My students. I failed to protect them once. I won't fail again. He saw the determination in her eyes, the same steel that had driven her to walk for 3 days with that terrible burden. You might die. I'm their teacher. I'm supposed to die for them if necessary. That's exactly what teachers do, or should do. We stand between children and the darkness. We fail sometimes, but we stand. He couldn't argue with that. Truth was, she was right. He would need help with the children. And if they were going to die anyway, at least they'd die trying together. Can you shoot? My father taught me. I'm no marksman, but I can hit what I aim at if it's close enough. He handed her a revolver. 6 shots. Make them count. I only need 1. For Briggs, for myself. if it goes bad. It won't go bad. Liar. As darkness fell, they mounted up Caleb on Bess Marin, on his pack mule, which was gentler and more sure-footed. The sack of bloody shoes stayed behind, but Caleb tucked the photograph into his shirt pocket. He wanted those children's faces with him, reminding him what this was about. They rode in silence, the stars emerging one by one above them. The night was cool autumn asserting itself in the high country. Somewhere in the darkness, coyotes called to each other, their voices echoing off the canyon walls. "Caleb," Marin said softly. "Yeah." "Thank you. Don't thank me yet." "No, I need to say it now. In case. Thank you for not letting me die on your porch. Thank you for believing this is possible. Thank you for being the kind of man who sees those shoes and decides to act. I haven't been that kind of man for a long time. Maybe you always were. You just needed a reason." They rode on through the darkness, two broken people heading toward what was almost certainly death, carrying the fragile hope that sometimes, just sometimes, the universe allows good to triumph over evil. That sometimes the children get saved. That sometimes one man and one woman can make a difference. Behind them, Dustfall Ridge disappeared into the darkness. Ahead, the mountains loomed black against the stars, holding secrets and sorrows in their ancient hearts. And somewhere among those peaks in a canyon called Perdition, children waited in darkness for a rescue that logic said would never come. But logic had never met Caleb Turner when he'd finally found something worth dying for. And it had never met Marin Foster when her children were in danger. The night was deep and full of terrors. But they rode on anyway. The mountain trail narrowed as they climbed higher, forcing them to ride single file. Caleb let his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. The moon was only a sliver, providing just enough light to see the path, but not enough to make them easy targets. Every sound made Marin tense behind him. The crack of a branch, the rustle of wind through pine needles, the distant howl of something that might have been wolf or wind. "How much further?" Marin whispered when they stopped to water the horses at a small spring. 3 miles, maybe 4. "We'll leave the horses here and go on foot for the last mile." She nodded, though he could see her hands trembling as she held the reins. Not from fear, he realized, but from anticipation. The closer they got to Perdition, the more she seemed to transform. The broken woman who'd collapsed on his porch was disappearing, replaced by something harder, more dangerous. A mother wolf approaching the den where her cubs were held. They tied the horses in a small grove of aspens far enough from the trail that they wouldn't be easily found. Caleb loaded himself with as much ammunition as he could carry, strapped a knife to his boot, another to his belt. He watched Marin check the revolver he'd given her, saw her mouth something that might have been a prayer or a promise. The last mile took them an hour to traverse. They moved slowly, carefully aware that Briggs might have sentries posted. The path wound upward through scattered boulders and stunted pines, the air growing thinner with each step. Caleb's old war injuries protested the shoulder that had taken a Union bullet at Chancellorsville. The knee twisted in a fall from a dying horse, but he pushed through the pain. Pain was just the body's opinion, and he'd stopped listening to his body's opinions long ago. They smelled perdition before they saw it. Smoke from cook fires. The distinctive odor of too many men living in too small a space. And underneath it all, something worse, the smell of suffering, of fear, concentrated and left to fester. "There," Caleb whispered, pointing to a gap in the rocks ahead. They crawled the last 50 yards on their bellies, spreading themselves flat behind a cluster of boulders that overlooked the canyon entrance. What they saw made Caleb's strategic mind start calculating, while his human heart grew cold with rage. The canyon opened up like a wound in the mountain, maybe 300 yards wide at its broadest point. The old mining buildings were still standing, though barely wooden structures, weathered silver gray, held together more by habit than nails. Electric lights strung on poles cast harsh shadows powered by a generator whose rhythmic chugging echoed off the canyon walls. But it was the cage that drew the eye and held it in horrified fascination. In the center of the camp, someone had built a large pen out of mining timbers and barbed wire. Inside, Caleb could make out small figures huddled together for warmth. Children. Maybe 15 or 20 of them, though it was hard to count in the uncertain light. They sat pressed against each other, some clearly sleeping others staring at nothing with the 1,000-yard stare he'd seen on soldiers after particularly brutal battles. "Oh, God," Marin breathed beside him. "There are so many." More than the 6 from Colton's Crossing, that was certain. Briggs had been busy collecting his terrible inventory from who knew how many settlements. "Do you see Emma and James?" Caleb asked. She was scanning the cage desperately. "I can't. The light's not. Wait, there." Her voice broke. "That's Emma's dress. The blue one with flowers. And James beside her." Caleb followed her gaze, saw 2 small figures near the cage's far side. They were alive, at least. That was something. "Count the guards," he said, forcing his mind back to tactics. They watched for 20 minutes, noting movements and patterns. 8 men visible, though there were certainly more in the barracks. 2 guards at the canyon entrance, both half asleep at their posts. 2 patrolling the perimeter with dogs, massive mastiffs that looked like they'd been bred for war rather than companionship. 2 more near the cage itself playing cards on an overturned crate. Another in the mining tower that served as a watch post, and one walking between buildings seemingly at random. "Where's Briggs?" Marin asked. Caleb pointed to the foreman's house set on higher ground at the canyon's back wall. Light glowed in the windows. "There, most likely. Question is, how many men are with him?" As if in answer to his question, the door opened and Silas Briggs himself emerged. Even from this distance, Caleb could tell the man was massive, 6.5 feet at least, built like a prizefighter gone to seed. He wore a lawman's star on his vest, a mockery of the authority he'd once claimed. 2 men flanked him, rifles casual in their hands. Briggs walked to the cage and the children shrank back from the wire. He said something Caleb couldn't hear, then laughed a sound that carried clearly in the still night air. One of the children, a boy of maybe 12, stood up and appeared to respond. Briggs's hand moved faster than seemed possible for such a large man, reaching through the wire to grab the boy by the throat, lifting him off his feet. Marin made a sound beside Caleb, her hand going to the revolver. He put his hand over hers, holding it still. "Not yet," he whispered. Briggs held the boy for a long moment, then dropped him. The child fell in a heap, other children rushing to help him. Briggs laughed again and headed back to his house, his guards trailing behind. "I'm going to kill him," Marin said, her voice flat and certain as stone. "You'll have to get in line." They watched for another hour, memorizing the camp's rhythm. The guard changed at midnight, men stumbling out of the barracks to replace those on duty. The dogs were kenneled near the horse corral, far enough from the cage that they wouldn't immediately detect someone approaching from the opposite direction. "Here's what we do," Caleb said finally. "I go in from the south wall, work my way to the generator. Kill the lights, then hit the barracks in the confusion. You circle around to the north, get to the cage while everyone's distracted." "How am I supposed to open it?" He handed her a pair of heavy wire cutters from his pack. "These'll go through the barbed wire. Get the children out, lead them up the north trail. There's an old mine shaft about a quarter-mile up, I saw it on the map. Hide them there." "What about you?" "I'll buy you time, keep them busy." "That's suicide." "That's the job." She turned to look at him fully. "You don't have to die for this." "We'll see." They started to move, then froze. Someone was coming up the trail from below, whistling tunelessly. A lone figure appeared, walking with the casual confidence of someone who belonged. As he passed beneath one of the electric lights, Caleb saw he was young, maybe 20, with a rifle slung over his shoulder and a bottle in his hand. The young man paused to take a drink, and in that moment of distraction, Caleb moved. He came up behind the guard, silent as death itself, one hand clamping over his mouth, the other driving a knife between his ribs. The guard's eyes went wide, his hand scrabbling weakly at Caleb's arm. Then he went limp. Caleb lowered him gently to the ground, dragged the body behind a boulder. "Jesus," Marin whispered. "He would have raised the alarm." "I know, it's just, he looked so young." "Old enough to cage children." She nodded, her face hardening again. They separated, then Marin circling north while Caleb worked his way along the southern canyon wall. The path he'd identified from above was harder to navigate than expected, loose shale that threatened to give way beneath his boots, sending cascades of pebbles down that sounded like avalanches in the quiet night. He was halfway to the generator when one of the dogs started barking. Caleb froze, pressing himself against the canyon wall. The barking intensified, joined by the second dog. A guard came out of the barracks shouting at the animals to shut up, but they kept barking, straining against their chains focused on something in the darkness. More men emerged, grabbing rifles. Someone ran for the foreman's house. Caleb cursed under his breath. The plan was falling apart before it had properly begun. He could see Marin from his position a shadow among shadows near the cage, but if the guards started searching, he made a decision that probably saved both their lives. Instead of trying to hide, he stood up and started shooting. His first shot took the man near the dog kennel in the chest, spinning him around. The second caught a guard coming out of the barracks in the shoulder. Then everyone was shooting muzzle flashes, lighting up the canyon like deadly fireflies, bullets whining off rocks around him. Caleb ran along the ledge, using the elevation to his advantage. He dropped behind a boulder as return fire intensified, counted to 3, then popped up in a different spot to fire again. He was trying to seem like more than one man firing from different positions, rapidly making them think they were under attack by a larger force. "The south wall," someone shouted. "They're on the south wall, boss." "Good. Let them focus there," while Marin got to the children. He could see her moving in his peripheral vision, a determined ghost heading for the cage. The guards there had abandoned their card game rifles raised, but they were looking toward his position, not behind them. Caleb shot. One of them watched him crumple. The other spun, searching for the shooter, and Marin put her single bullet through his head. She'd said she could hit what she aimed at if it was close enough. She hadn't lied. The generator was 30 yards from his position, housed in a wooden shed that looked like it would burn nicely. But to reach it, he'd have to cross open ground under fire. He was calculating odds when Silas Briggs emerged from his house. The man was even more massive than he'd appeared from a distance, and he moved with surprising grace for his size. He carried a shotgun in one hand and a lantern in the other, the light swinging in wide arcs as he scanned the canyon walls. "Turner!" he bellowed. "Caleb Turner! I know it's you!" Caleb went still. How could Briggs know his name? That school teacher you're sweet on, she talked plenty when we had our hands on her. Told us all about the lonely rancher at Dustfall Ridge. Did you think we wouldn't check? Did you think we wouldn't be ready? It was a trap. The whole thing had been a trap. Got men on the North Trail right now. Briggs continued, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. That's where she is, isn't it? Going for the cage while you play hero. My boys'll have her soon enough. Then we'll have some fun with her before she joins the others. Caleb saw Marin freeze near the cage, saw her look toward the North Trail where shadows were indeed moving. More guards closing in on her position. She was trapped between them and the cage, nowhere to run. The children had seen her now. They were pressed against the wire, some crying, others reaching through the gaps toward her. He could hear Emma's voice, high and desperate. "Miss Foster. Miss Foster." Marin looked at the approaching guards, then at the children, then up at Caleb's position. Even from this distance, he could see her make the choice. She turned to the cage and started cutting the wire cutters, working frantically at the barbed strands. "Forget the teacher," Briggs shouted to his men. "I want Turner $500 to the man who brings me his head." That got their attention. The firing intensified, forcing Caleb to stay low. Chunks of rock exploded around him as bullets struck. He could hear men climbing, trying to flank his position. Time was running out. He pulled the last resort from his pack, 3 sticks of dynamite he'd found in his barn, left over from when he'd needed to clear boulders from his field. The fuses were old, might not even work, but it was what he had. He lit the first one with shaking hands, counted to 3, then threw it toward the barracks. The explosion was beautiful in terrible wood and men flying through the air. The second stick went toward the dog kennel, not to hurt the animals, but to free them. The explosion broke their chains, sent them running into the night, howling in terror. The third he saved. Marin had the cage open now. Children were pouring out, some running, others having to be carried by the older ones. But the guards from the North Trail were almost on them. Marin put herself between the children and the approaching men, the empty revolver still in her hand, useless but held steady. Caleb lit the third stick of dynamite, judged the distance, and threw it not at the guards, but at the base of the watchtower. The explosion was massive, the tower tilting, then crashing down directly across the path of the approaching guards. They scattered, diving for cover, and in that moment of chaos, Marin and the children ran. But not toward the North Trail. that was blocked now by the fallen tower and the guards beyond it. Instead, she led them deeper into the canyon toward the old mine buildings at the back. It was the wrong direction, a dead end, but it was the only way open to them. Caleb left his covered position, sliding down the loose shale in a barely controlled fall. He hit the canyon floor, running rifle in one hand, knife in the other. A guard came at him from the left. Caleb shot him without breaking stride. Another from the right got the knife in his throat. He could see Briggs ahead, the big man striding toward where Marin and the children had disappeared into a cluster of buildings. The shotgun in his hands boomed, blowing chunks out of wooden walls. "You can't save them, Turner," Briggs shouted. "There's nowhere for them to go. The canyon's a dead end." He was right. Caleb knew he was right, but that didn't matter now. All that mattered was putting himself between Briggs and those children. He caught up to Briggs just as the man was reloading. Caleb hit him from behind, driving his shoulder into the big man's kidneys. It was like hitting a wall, but Briggs stumbled forward, dropping the shotgun. They went down together, rolling in the dirt, fists and elbows and knees, all trying to find vulnerable spots. Briggs was stronger, but Caleb had learned to fight dirty in places where honor got you killed. He got his thumb in Briggs's eye, felt the man roar and pull back. That gave Caleb enough space to draw his boot knife, but Briggs caught his wrist, slowly forcing the blade back toward Caleb's own throat. "You should have stayed on your ranch, old man." Briggs growled, his face inches from Caleb's. His breath smelled of whiskey and cruelty. "Should have minded your own business." "This is my business," Caleb gasped, struggling against the inexorable pressure. "Why, they're not your kids." "They're somebody's kids." "So what?" And there it was, the fundamental difference between them. Caleb couldn't explain to this man why children mattered, why their innocence was worth protecting, why some things were sacred. You either knew that in your bones, or you didn't. The knife was inches from Caleb's throat when the gunshot rang out. Briggs's eyes went wide, his grip loosening. He looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest, then up at something behind Caleb. He opened his mouth maybe to curse or plead or pray, but only blood came out. He toppled sideways, the knife falling from nerveless fingers. Caleb rolled away, looked back to see Marin standing there with a smoking rifle, one of the guard's weapons she must have picked up. Her face was streaked with tears and dirt, her dress torn and bloody, but her hands were steady. "The children?" Caleb asked. "Hidden in the ore processing plant. But there's more guards coming. I can hear them." He struggled to his feet, retrieved his own rifle. "How many kids?" 18. Some can walk, others can't. The youngest is maybe 4. Christ. They could hear shouting now, men reorganizing after the chaos following orders from someone with military experience. They'd be surrounded soon, trapped in the processing plant with no way out. "There is one way," Marin said, reading his expression. "The old mine shaft. It connects to the processing plant, goes straight through the mountain, comes out on the other side of the ridge." "You're sure?" "The children told me. Some of them were forced to work in there, pulling out leftover ore. They said there's a passage all the way through. That's a half-mile of mountain, in the dark, with terrified children. Or we die here." Another non-choice. They ran for the processing plant, an enormous wooden structure that looked ready to collapse at any moment. Inside, the children were huddled behind rusted machinery, eyes wide with terror. Emma and James clung to Marin when they saw her sobbing into her torn dress. "Listen to me," Caleb said to the children, pitching his voice low but urgent. "We're getting out of here, but you have to be brave. Can you be brave?" Nods all around, though he could see the fear in their faces. "The older ones carry the younger," he continued. "Everyone holds hands, makes a chain. Nobody lets go, no matter what. Understand?" More nods. A girl of maybe 13, she looked like she might be the oldest, picked up a small boy who couldn't have been more than 4. Other older children did the same with the youngest ones. The mine shaft entrance was a black mouth in the back wall of the plant, exhaling cold air that smelled of stone and secrets. Mining cart tracks led into the darkness, rusted and broken in places. Caleb found an old lantern miraculously still containing some oil. He lit it with shaking hands. "This is insane," Marin whispered. "Yes." They could hear boots on wooden floors now. The guards had reached the plant. "Go," Caleb said. "I'll hold them here." "No, we all go or nobody goes." "Marin, that's my condition. We all live or we all die." He wanted to argue, but there was no time. The first guard appeared in the doorway. Caleb shot him, and the man fell backward, momentarily blocking the entrance. It wouldn't hold them for long, but maybe long enough. "Run!" he shouted. They plunged into the mine shaft, the lantern casting dancing shadows on rough stone walls. The children made a human chain as instructed, older ones carrying younger, everyone holding tight to each other. The tracks were treacherous, broken in places, forcing them to stumble over twisted metal and rotted wooden ties. Behind them, they could hear pursuit men shouting boots on stone, the occasional gunshot that echoed through the tunnel like thunder. The mountains seemed to amplify every sound, making it impossible to tell how close their pursuers were. "Keep going," Caleb urged, bringing up the rear, firing back into the darkness whenever he saw a muzzle flash. The tunnel branched in places, side passages leading off into absolute blackness. At each junction, Marin had to make a choice based on the children's scattered memories and her own intuition. Once they took a wrong turn, found themselves facing a cave-in after 50 yards, had to backtrack, while their pursuers gained ground. The 4-year-old was crying, the sound echoing off the walls. Other children were whimpering, exhausted and terrified. But they kept moving that human chain, never breaking, the older children literally dragging the younger when necessary. They'd been underground for maybe 20 minutes when Caleb heard something that made his blood freeze, the sound of more boots, but from ahead of them, not behind. "They sent men around the mountain," he said to Marin. "We're trapped." She looked at him, then at the children, then made a decision that surprised him. She grabbed the lantern and smashed it against the wall. They were plunged into absolute darkness. "Everyone down," she hissed. "Against the walls, quiet as you can." They all dropped, children pressing themselves against the cold stone. In the darkness, Caleb could hear his own heartbeat, the ragged breathing of 18 terrified children, the drip of water somewhere in the depths. The boots came closer from both directions. Caleb could see lights now, lanterns and torches, approaching from front and back. They were about to be caught in a crossfire with nowhere to hide. That's when they heard a rumbling from deep in the mountain, like the earth clearing its throat. Dust and pebbles fell from the ceiling. The rumbling grew louder, deeper, and Caleb realized what was happening. The old dynamite, the explosions, the gunfire, it had all destabilized the already precarious mine shaft. "Cave in!" someone shouted from behind them. "Get out! Get out!" The guards from both directions started running, but they were running away back toward their respective entrances. The rumbling became a roar and larger rocks started falling. Caleb grabbed the nearest children, pulling them against him, trying to shield them with his body. Marin was doing the same, gathering kids like a hen with chicks. The collapse, when it came, was both catastrophic and merciful. The ceiling came down between them and their pursuers, tons of rock, sealing off the passage in both directions. But the section where they huddled held, supported by newer-looking timbers that someone had installed recently, probably Briggs's men, when they were forcing children to work in here. They were trapped, but alive. And more importantly, their pursuers couldn't reach them. "Is everyone okay?" Marin called out in the darkness. A chorus of small voices answered, some crying, others coughing from the dust, but all accounted for. "Now what?" one of the older boys asked. Caleb felt along the wall, found what he was looking for, an old ventilation shaft barely 2 feet wide, leading upward at an angle. Air was flowing from it, which meant it led somewhere. "Can you all fit through there?" he asked the children. "We can," the 13-year-old girl said. "But what about you and Miss Foster?" Caleb and Marin looked at each other in the darkness, though they couldn't see each other's faces. "You go first," Marin said to the children. "Sarah, you lead. Count them as they go up. Make sure everyone gets through. When you get out, you run. You find the horses. We left 2 of them tied in an aspen grove about a mile down the main trail. You ride for help. Can you do that?" "Yes, Miss Foster." One by one, the children squeezed into the ventilation shaft. Some had to be pushed, too frightened to move on their own. Others went willingly, eager to escape the darkness. Emma and James were among the last to go, clinging to Marin until she firmly pushed them toward the shaft. "We'll be right behind you," she lied. When the last child had disappeared into the shaft, Caleb and Marin were left alone in the darkness. They could hear the children's voices echoing down from above, growing fainter as they climbed. "That shaft's too small for us," Caleb said. "I know. This whole mountain could come down any minute. I know that too." They sat in the darkness listening to the mountain groan around them. Somewhere water was dripping with metronomic persistence. At least they got out, Marin said. Yeah. That's what matters. Yeah. Caleb. Thank you. For getting you trapped in a collapsing mine. For caring, for acting, for being the kind of man who sees evil and stands against it. I just did what needed doing. No. You did what was right. There's a difference. They could hear more rumbling, feel the mountains shifting around them. It wouldn't be long now. Tell me about Martha, Marin said suddenly. So he did. There in the darkness that might be their tomb, he told her about the woman who'd made him believe in goodness again after the war, about their plans and dreams, the life they were going to build together, about the baby clothes she'd sewn while pregnant, humming lullabies to her belly. She would have liked you, he said. You think? Yeah. She had a thing about brave women, said they were the ones who really changed the world while men just took credit for it. Marin laughed, the sound strange in the darkness. Smart woman. The smartest. My husband was like that, Marin said. Smart, I mean, and kind. He died 2 years ago, typhoid. I thought I'd die too from grief, but Emma and James needed me. The other children needed me. So I kept going. That's all any of us can do. Keep going. Until we can't. The rumbling was getting louder. Dust was falling steadily now, coating them in grit. I'm scared, Marin admitted. Me too. You don't seem scared. 23 years of practice hiding it. She found his hand in the darkness, squeezed it. If we die here, we won't. But if we do, then we die knowing those kids got out. That's not the worst way to go. She was quiet for a moment. No, it's not. That's when Caleb felt it, a breeze on his face, coming not from the ventilation shaft, but from somewhere else. He turned his head, trying to locate the source. You feel that wind. From where? They felt along the walls, hands exploring the darkness. Marin found at first a crack in the rock wall, maybe 3 feet wide, hidden behind a pile of fallen stones. Air was flowing through it, carrying the scent of pine and freedom. It's a way out, she breathed. They cleared the stones frantically, revealing a natural fissure in the rock. It was tight, barely wide enough for a person, but it went somewhere. They could see stars through it, impossibly distant, but undeniably there. You first, Caleb said. Together, she countered. They squeezed into the fissure side by side, rock scraping skin clothes, tearing. The passage was longer than it looked, winding through the mountain's heart. Several times they got stuck, had to help each other through the tightest spots. Marin's dress was in tatters by the time they emerged. Caleb's shirt nothing but rags. They came out on a ledge overlooking a valley, the eastern sky just beginning to lighten with dawn. Below them they could see lights, torches moving through the trees. Search parties, but moving away from them, not toward them. They think we're dead, Caleb said. Good. Let them think it. They found a game trail leading down from the ledge, followed it until they reached a creek. They drank deeply, washed the dust and blood from their faces. The sun was fully up by the time they made it back to where they'd left the horses. The animals were gone, but there were tracks, many small footprints leading away. The children had found them, had escaped. Caleb felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. They made it, Marin said, tears streaming down her face. They actually made it. Yeah. Now what? Now we walk. Get to the nearest town, make sure those kids are safe, then disappear before Briggs's remaining men come looking for revenge. Disappear where... Caleb looked at her, this woman who'd walked into his life carrying bloody shoes and had somehow made him care again. I hear California's nice. Lots of schools need teachers. And ranchers need them too. They started walking, 2 battered souls heading toward an uncertain future. Behind them, smoke still rose from perdition, the camp burning itself out like a fever breaking. Ahead, the sun climbed higher, painting the mountains gold and green and infinite. They'd walked maybe a mile when they heard horses approaching. Caleb pushed Marin behind a boulder, readied his rifle with the few bullets he had left. But the riders who appeared weren't Briggs's men. It was a posse from Colton's Crossing led by a man wearing a federal marshal's star. and riding with them on a horse too big for her was Sarah Chen, the 13-year-old who'd led the children to safety. "Miss Foster," the girl cried, practically falling off the horse in her eagerness to reach them. "Mr. Turner, you're alive!" The marshal, a weathered man with suspicious eyes, looked them over. "These the two you told us about?" "Yes, sir," Sarah said. "They saved us, all of us." "Where are the others?" Marin asked urgently. "Emma and James." "Safe in town," the marshal said. "All 18 of them, though. Some are in rough shape. You two look like you've been through hell." "Near enough," Caleb said. "Briggs? Dead." "You're certain?" "I watched him die," Marin said flatly. The marshal studied them for a long moment. "There's going to be questions. Lots of them. Dead men all over that canyon, a burned camp, traumatized children telling wild stories." "The children are telling the truth," Caleb said. "I believe them. But there's still process to follow. You'll need to come back to town, give statements." "The kids need to get home," Marin said. "To their real homes, their parents." "We're working on that. Some parents are already in town. Others we're sending word to. It'll take time to sort out where some of these kids belong. Seems Briggs was taking them from all over the territory." They mounted up behind riders, started back toward Colton's Crossing. As they rode, Sarah told them what had happened after the children escaped. How they'd crawled through that ventilation shaft for what felt like hours, some of the smaller ones needing to be pulled by the older. How they'd emerged on a hillside just as dawn was breaking, dirty and terrified but alive. "We found the horses like you said," Sarah reported. "But there were only 2 and 18 of us, so I rode one, and Timothy rode the other, and we went as fast as we could to town. The others hid in the woods until we could come back for them." "That was smart." Marin set her arms around the girl as they shared a horse. "You did exactly right. I remembered what you taught us in school, about staying calm in emergencies, thinking through problems step by step. I'm proud of you." The girl was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Are you coming back to teach?" "I mean," Marin looked over at Caleb riding on the horse beside them. "I don't know, maybe. Would you want me to?" "Yes, but different. I think we all need different now." Colton's Crossing appeared around a bend, looking exactly as rough and unforgiving as Caleb remembered. But there was something different in the air, an energy that hadn't been there before. People were gathered in the street waiting. As the posse approached, they pressed forward, calling out names, searching faces. The reunions that followed were both beautiful and heartbreaking. Parents finding children they'd thought lost forever, children flying into arms they'd believed they'd never feel again. But there were also children no one claimed, children whose families were dead, or unknown children who stood apart and watched with eyes too old for their faces. Emma and James nearly knocked Marin down when they saw her clinging to her like they'd never let go. She held them, tears streaming down her face, whispering their names over and over, like a prayer finally answered. The marshal took Caleb and Marin to his office for questioning, but it was perfunctory. The children's testimony, the physical evidence, and the freed captives all painted a clear picture of what had happened. Briggs had been running a child trafficking ring, selling them to whoever would pay, minds needing small bodies for narrow shafts, brothels in lawless towns, wealthy families wanting servants who couldn't run away. "You did a good thing," the marshal said finally. "A necessary thing. But there'll be men looking for revenge. Briggs had friends, business partners who lost money when you shut down his operation." "I know," Caleb said. "What will you do?" Caleb looked at Marin, who was visible through the window, surrounded by children in the street. "Move on, I expect. Find somewhere new." "California." "Maybe." The marshal pulled out a paper, started writing. "I have a friend in Sacramento, runs a school for orphans and displaced children. Could use a teacher with experience handling traumatized kids. Could probably use a groundskeeper too, someone good with his hands, able to keep the place running." He handed the paper to Caleb. It was a letter of introduction suggesting that the Bears were exactly the kind of people the school needed. "Why?" Caleb asked. "Because those kids out there are going to need help for a long time, and seems to me you two are uniquely qualified to provide it." They stayed in Colton's Crossing for a week, helping reunite families, arranging care for the orphans, giving testimony for the official record. Some of Briggs's men had survived scattered into the wilderness. There were reports of them heading south for Mexico, wanting nothing to do with the federal attention now focused on the area. On the morning they were set to leave, Caleb stood in the small cemetery outside town. He'd had a stone carved and placed there, though no body lay beneath it. It read simply, "For the unnamed children, lost but not forgotten." Marin found him there, Emma and James in tow. They were coming with them to California, along with 6 other children who had no families to claim them. "It's not the life you planned," Marin said softly. "No," Caleb agreed. "It's not the life I planned 23 years ago, but maybe it's the life I was meant to have all along." She took his hand, and together they stood before the stone, remembering children they'd never known, mourning losses that could never be fully counted. Then they turned toward the west, toward California, and new beginnings, toward a future that would be complicated and difficult, but never, never empty. The wagon was loaded, the children settled as comfortably as possible for the long journey. Caleb took the reins while Marin sat beside him, a map spread across her lap. Behind them, 8 young voices began to sing a song Marin had taught them, something about rivers and mountains and finding your way home. As they rolled out of Colton's Crossing, Caleb thought about those bloody shoes that had started all this. They'd burned them finally in a ceremony the children had insisted on. Each child had said the name of someone lost, someone taken, someone who needed to be remembered. The smoke had risen into the Colorado sky, carrying those names to whatever comes after. "Do you regret it?" Marin asked as the town disappeared behind them. "The life you're leaving behind." Caleb thought about his empty house at Dustfall Ridge, 23 years of solitude and silence. No, that wasn't living. It was just waiting to die. And now I have reason to live. The sun climbed higher as they traveled west, 8 children's voices singing in the back of a wagon, 2 broken people learning to heal by helping others heal. It wasn't the story any of them would have written for themselves, but sometimes the best stories are the ones that write themselves in blood and courage and second chances. Behind them, the mountains held their secrets. Ahead, California waited with promises of orange groves and ocean air, and schools that needed teachers who understood that sometimes the most important lesson is simply survival. And in between, on a dusty trail that stretched for hundreds of miles, a makeshift family was being forged from loss and hope in equal measure. The wagon wheel broke on the 7th day, 20 miles from the nearest town, under a sun that seemed determined to bake them all into the red dirt of the trail. Caleb heard the crack, felt the wagon lurch sideways, and managed to pull the horses to a stop before they tipped completely. "Everyone out," he called, already knowing what he'd find when he looked. The children clambered down, some helping, the younger ones, their faces flushed with heat and coated with trail dust. Emma stayed close to Marin's skirts, while James tried to help Caleb examine the damage the boy's 8-year-old hands, eager but uncertain. "Can you fix it?" James asked, his voice carrying that particular mix of hope and worry that Caleb was learning to recognize in all these children. The wheel had split clean through, victim of too much weight and too many miles of rough road. Caleb had a spare, but it would take hours to change it. And they were exposed here, sitting targets on an open trail where anyone could see them for miles. "I can fix it," he told the boy, ruffling his hair. "But it'll take time." Marin was already organizing the children into the shade of some scraggly cottonwoods, rationing out water from their dwindling supplies. She caught his eye, and he saw the question there. They both knew the danger of being stopped this long in open country. News of what had happened at Perdition had spread, and while most folks called them heroes, there were others who'd lost money or friends in Briggs's operation. Others who might be looking for revenge. "Sarah," Caleb called to the oldest girl, "take Timothy and scout up that rise. You see anyone coming, you run back fast as you can." The girl nodded, understanding immediately. She'd aged years in the weeks since Perdition, her childhood burned away like morning mist. All these children had that look now, survivors of something that had shown them too early how cruel the world could be. Caleb set to work on the wheel while Marin kept the younger children occupied with lessons, using sticks to draw letters in the dirt. It was a strange classroom, the vast sky, their ceiling, the desert, their floor. But the children seemed grateful for the normalcy of it. Little Robert Price, the 4-year-old who'd barely spoken since his rescue, sat in Marin's lap tracing letters with intense concentration. M is for Mama, he said, suddenly, the first words he'd spoken in days. Marin's breath caught, but she kept her voice steady. That's right, sweetheart. M is for Mama. Mama's gone, Robert said matter-of-factly, in that way children had of stating devastating truths. Bad men took her away. I know, Marin said softly, holding him closer. I'm sorry. Will you be my mama now? The question hung in the desert air like dust motes, visible and fragile. Caleb paused in his work, watching Marin's face as she struggled with how to answer. I'll take care of you, she said finally. We both will, Mr. Turner and I. Is that okay? Robert considered this seriously, then nodded and went back to his letters. Caleb had the old wheel off and was wrestling the spare into place when Sarah came running back down the rise, Timothy close behind her. Riders, she gasped. 5 of them coming from the east. Caleb's hands went to his rifle, but Marin caught his arm. Could be anyone. Traders, settlers, anyone. Could be. He agreed, but he checked his ammunition anyway. The riders appeared on the horizon, dark specks growing larger against the shimmering heat. Caleb positioned himself between them and the children rifle, held casual but ready. Marin moved the youngest children behind the wagon, keeping them out of sight. As the riders drew closer, Caleb could make out details. They were rough-looking men, trail-dirty and hard-eyed, the kind who might rob you or help you depending on their mood and what was in it for them. The leader, a man with a graying beard and a scar that ran from his ear to his chin, raised a hand in greeting. "Trouble with your wagon," he called out, stopping his horse a respectful distance away. "Nothing we can't handle," Caleb replied, not lowering his rifle. The man's eyes took in the scene, lingering on Marin and the visible children. "That's a lot of young ones for a family trip." "They're mine," Marin said, stepping forward with a confidence she didn't feel. "My husband and I are taking them to family in California." The lie came smooth and natural, and Caleb played along, moving to stand beside her in a way that suggested partnership, possession, protection. 8 children, the scarred man mused. Must be quite a handful. "We manage," Caleb said flatly. There was a moment of tension, the kind that preceded violence in places where law was just a suggestion. Then one of the other riders, younger with nervous eyes, spoke up. "Boss, ain't these the ones from perdition, the ones who—" "Shut up, Jake," the leader snapped, but his eyes had sharpened, looking at Caleb with new interest. "You're Turner, aren't you, Caleb Turner?" Caleb said nothing, but his finger moved to the trigger. "Thought so," the man continued. "We heard about what you did. Heard you walked into hell itself and brought out a passel of kids." "You heard wrong," Caleb said. "We're just settlers heading west." The scarred man laughed, a sound like gravel in a tin cup. "Sure you are. And I'm the president of these United States." He looked at his men, seemed to make a decision. "Jake, Tom, get down and help this man with his wheel." "Boss?" Jake looked confused. "You heard me. Man's got a broken wheel and a wagon full of kids in this heat. We're going to help him fix it." "Why?" one of the other riders asked. The leader's face hardened. "Because I had a daughter once, about that age." He nodded toward Sarah. "Apaches took her 5 years back. Never found her, never got to bury her proper. If someone had done for her what this man did for these kids—" He trailed off, then dismounted. "Besides, any man who walked into Silas Briggs's camp and walked out alive deserves respect, or at least a helping hand." With 5 men working, the wheel was changed in half the time it would have taken Caleb alone. The scarred man, who finally introduced himself as Wade Morrison, shared water from his own supplies, and even produced some hard candy for the children, who took it with wide-eyed suspicion until Marin nodded that it was okay. "Where are you really headed?" Morrison asked Caleb quietly, while the others were distracted. "Sacramento. There's a school there." "Long way. Dangerous road." "Every road's dangerous." Morrison pulled out a worn map marked several spots. "Stay clear of these places. Briggs had friends there, men who won't take kindly to what you did. But here," he marked other spots, "these are safe. Tell them Morrison sent you. They'll treat you fair." "Why are you helping us?" Morrison looked over at the children, now less fearful, some even smiling as they ate their candy. Maybe because there's been enough taking in this world. Maybe it's time for some giving back. He mounted his horse, gathered his men. You didn't see us. We didn't see you. But Turner. He paused. What you did at Perdition. That was a good thing. Don't let anyone tell you different. They rode off, leaving dust and questions in their wake. Caleb and Marin got the children loaded back into the wagon, but the encounter had shaken them all. The world was full of dangerous men, but sometimes, just sometimes, those dangerous men had hearts that remembered what it was like to love and lose. They made camp that night near a small stream Morrison had marked as safe. The children splashed in the shallow water, washing off days of trail dust, their laughter echoing off the canyon walls. It was the first time Caleb had heard some of them laugh since Perdition. Lucy Chen, the younger of the two sisters, brought him a smooth river stone. For you, she said shyly, for protection. Thank you, he said solemnly, pocketing the stone. I'll keep it always. My mother said stones remember everything they see, Lucy told him. This one will remember us being safe. That night after the children were asleep, Caleb and Marin sat by the dying fire, planning the next day's travel. Morrison could have robbed us, or worse, Marin said quietly, but he didn't. Because of what we did. Because of what you did, Caleb corrected. I just pulled the trigger. You're the one who refused to leave without them. We did it together, she insisted, then softer. That's what I told Robert, that we'd take care of them together. Is that what you want? She looked at him across the fire, her face half in shadow, half in light. These children need stability. They need to know they won't be abandoned again. That's not what I asked. She was quiet for a long moment, listening to the sound of the stream, the soft breathing of sleeping children. I buried my husband 2 years ago. I thought I'd never care about anyone again, not that way. Then I lost Emma and James, and I thought I'd die from it. But you, she paused, choosing words carefully. You showed me that broken people can still do whole things. That's what I want. To do whole things with you, whatever that means. Caleb moved around the fire to sit beside her, not touching, just close enough that she could feel his warmth. I haven't been a husband in 23 years. Don't know if I remember how. I don't think either of us is who we used to be. Maybe that's okay. Maybe we can be something new. For them, he gestured toward the sleeping children. For them. For us. For whatever comes next. He took her hand then carefully, like it was something that might break or fly away. Her fingers interlaced with his, calloused and strong from years of work, and they sat that way while the fire died to embers and the stars wheeled overhead. They were 3 days from the next settlement when the fever started. It was Timothy Harlan, first the baker's boy, who'd been so strong through everything. He woke burning hot, delirious, calling for his dead mother. Then it was Robert, his small body shaking with chills despite the desert heat. Within hours, 4 of the 8 children were sick. It's the water, Marin said, horror in her voice. That stream where they played. Something was wrong with it. Caleb rode ahead hard, leaving Marin with the wagon and the children pushing his horse to its limits to reach the settlement. He found a doctor, an old man named Holcomb who'd been patching up gunfighters and settlers for 30 years. Sounds like typhoid, Holcomb said, already packing his bag. How many sick? 4 when I left. Could be more by now. They rode back together through the night, Caleb's exhausted horse barely keeping pace. When they arrived at the wagon, all 8 children were down, some worse than others. Marin hadn't slept, moving between them with wet cloths and what little medicine they had. You need to rest, Holcomb told her after his initial examination. You're no good to them if you collapse. I can't, she said, her voice cracking. I can't lose them again. You won't, Caleb said firmly. We won't. But Timothy died that night, despite everything Holcomb tried. The boy who could bake bread like his father, who'd been so proud of that skill, slipped away as the moon set. They wrapped him in a blanket, and Caleb dug a grave by lantern light while Marin held the other children whispering prayers and promises. Sarah Chen was the next closest to the edge. The 13-year-old who'd led the others to safety was burning with fever, talking to people who weren't there, sometimes in English, sometimes in Mandarin. Her sister Lucy wouldn't leave her side, holding her hand and singing Chinese lullabies their mother had taught them. "She's fighting," Holcomb said, but his tone suggested it might not be enough. On the second night, Robert's fever broke. The little boy opened his eyes, looked directly at Marin, and said, "I'm hungry." She cried as she fed him thin soup tears of relief that at least one battle was being won. One by one, over the course of 4 days, the other children began to recover, all except Sarah. She lingered on the edge, neither improving nor worsening, caught in some liminal space between life and death. "There's nothing more I can do," Holcomb admitted on the 5th day. "It's up to her now." That night, Lucy crawled into the wagon where her sister lay. She spoke to her in Mandarin words Caleb and Marin couldn't understand, but recognized as pleas, as promises, as love. Then she began to sing a melody that sounded ancient and sad and somehow hopeful all at once. Sarah's eyes opened. She looked at her sister, managed the ghost of a smile, and whispered something in Mandarin. Lucy laughed through her tears, hugged her sister carefully. "What did she say?" Marin asked. "She said the song is off-key," Lucy translated. "She always criticizes my singing." Sarah recovered slowly but steadily after that. They stayed camped in that spot for another week, letting the children regain strength. Caleb hunted rabbit and deer, Marin made broths and stews, and gradually color returned to pale faces. They held a proper funeral for Timothy, all the children participating. Each said something about him, a memory, a kindness he'd shown. James talked about how Timothy had shared his candy at perdition even when there wasn't enough. Emma drew a picture of him baking bread and placed it on the grave. Lucy and Sarah sang a hymn in both languages. "He was brave," little Robert said solemnly. "He helped me when I was scared." They marked the grave with a cross Caleb carved from wood and stones the children gathered. It seemed wrong to leave him there alone in the desert, but they had no choice. The living needed to keep moving toward life. Dr. Holcomb refused payment for his services. "You saved these children from worse than death," he said. "Least I could do was try to save them from fever." As they prepared to leave, he pulled Caleb aside. "That woman of yours, she's something special. Don't let her go." "I won't," Caleb promised. "And those children, they're going to need more than just food and shelter. They've seen things, been through things. It'll come out in different ways at different times. We know. Do you? Because I've seen what trauma does to children. Some get quiet, some get angry, some seem fine, until years later when it all comes crashing down. Then we'll be there when it does." Holcomb studied him. "I believe you will." They were 2 weeks from Sacramento when they encountered the wagon train. 20 families heading to Oregon, full of hope and plans and dreams of rich farmland. The wagon master, a competent-looking woman named Elizabeth Hartley, invited them to join for safety. "We could use another gun," she said to Caleb. "And the children could use playmates." It was strange watching their 8 traumatized children interact with normal ones. At first they held back suspicious and wary, but children have a way of finding common ground, and soon they were playing games, sharing stories, being kids, in a way they hadn't been able to since perdition. Emma made friends with a girl named Rose, who had a collection of cornhusk dolls. James found a boy who liked to catch lizards and compare their medical qualities, which mostly meant making up increasingly outlandish cures. Even Sarah, still weak from her illness, was drawn into conversations with the older children, her natural intelligence making her a good storyteller around the evening fires. But at night, the nightmares came. Robert would wake screaming about bad men. Lucy would call for parents who would never answer. James would fight invisible enemies in his sleep. Each time Caleb and Marin would comfort them, hold them, remind them they were safe. The other families in the wagon train began to notice, to ask questions. Marin stuck to their story about being a family heading to California, but Elizabeth Hartley wasn't fooled. "Those aren't all your natural children," she said one evening, watching the mix of features and ages that didn't quite add up. "They're ours now," Marin replied simply. Elizabeth studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Good enough for me. Family's more than blood anyway." One of the families in the train had a son named Michael, about 15, who took a shine to Sarah. He was respectful and kind, bringing her wildflowers and offering to carry things for her. Sarah, still recovering, seemed bewildered by the attention. "He likes you," Lucy told her sister with 13-year-old authority. "That's silly," Sarah protested, but she kept the flowers. Watching them, Caleb felt a strange protectiveness rise in him. These children had become his responsibility in a way he hadn't expected. Not just their safety, but their futures, their happiness, their chance at normal life after extraordinary horror. "You're scowling," Marin observed, appearing at his elbow. "That boy's been hanging around Sarah." "Michael. He's harmless." "They're all harmless until they're not." She touched his arm gently. "She's allowed to be a normal girl, Caleb. That's what we're fighting for, isn't it? Their chance to be normal." He knew she was right, but it didn't ease the knot in his chest. These children had been through enough. He wanted to protect them from everything even innocent first crushes. The wagon train was attacked on the 18th day. It wasn't Briggs's men or random bandits. It was Indians, a raiding party of young braves looking for horses and supplies. The attack came at dawn, arrows whistling out of the morning mist, war cries splitting the air. Caleb had fought Indians before during his army days, but this was different. He had children to protect now, not territory. He positioned himself between the attackers and the wagon where Marin had gathered the children, his rifle speaking in measured rhythm. The wagon train's men mounted a defense, but they were settlers, not soldiers. The raiders had the advantage of surprise and skill. They swept through the outer wagons, taking what they wanted, setting fires to create chaos. One brave younger than the others made it to Caleb's wagon. He had his bow drawn, aimed at the huddle of children visible through the canvas. Caleb's rifle was empty, no time to reload. He threw himself at the brave, and they went down together, rolling in the dust. The brave was stronger, younger, faster. He got on top, knife flashing down. Caleb caught his wrist but knew he couldn't hold it for long. Then Sarah was there, hitting the brave with a wagon spoke she'd grabbed. Not hard enough to kill, but enough to stun. Caleb threw him off, and the brave scrambled away, rejoining his party as they retreated with their spoils. "You saved me," Caleb said to Sarah, breathing hard. "You saved us first," she replied simply. The attack had lasted maybe 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. 3 settlers were dead, several wounded, 2 wagons burned. But the children were safe. All of them. Though Robert hadn't stopped shaking, and Lucy was crying silently into her sister's shoulder. Elizabeth Hartley made the decision to push harder for the next settlement to get the wounded to a doctor and resupply. They made it in 2 days of brutal travel, everyone exhausted and on edge. The settlement was called Fortune's Rest, though there seemed to be little fortune and less rest in the rough collection of buildings. But it had a doctor, a general store, and most importantly, a telegraph office. Caleb sent a message to the school in Sacramento, the one the marshal had told them about. He got a response within hours. They were expected. Rooms were prepared. The children would be welcome. "It's real," Marin said, reading the telegram. "We're actually going to make it." "Don't jinx it," Caleb warned, but he felt the same relief. They parted ways with the wagon train in Fortune's Rest. Elizabeth Hartley hugged each of the children goodbye, slipping candy into their pockets. Michael gave Sarah a book of poetry, blushing furiously. She took it solemnly, promising to read it. "You take care of them," Elizabeth told Caleb and Marin. "They're special, these ones." "We know," Marin said. "I mean it. I've seen a lot of children on these trails, but these ones, they've got steel in them. They'll do important things someday, mark my words." The last leg to Sacramento was almost anticlimactic. No attacks, no broken wheels, no fever, just miles of trail disappearing under wagon wheels, bringing them closer to whatever new life awaited. The children grew quieter as they approached the city, anxiety replacing excitement. "What if they don't like us?" Emma asked Marin one evening. "How could they not like you? You're wonderful." "We're different now," Emma said with too much wisdom for her 9 years. "We know things other children don't." "That's true," Marin admitted. "But that doesn't make you less worthy of love. If anything, it makes you more precious because you survived." Sacramento appeared on the horizon like a promise, buildings and church spires and actual paved streets. The children pressed against the wagon sides, eyes wide. Most of them had never seen a real city before. The Mercy House School for Displaced Children sat on the outskirts of the city, a large white building with green shutters and a fence that looked more welcoming than forbidding. Gardens stretched out behind it, and they could see other children playing in the yard. The director, Mrs. Catherine Walsh, met them at the gate. She was a small woman with gray hair and kind eyes that had seen too much but hadn't hardened because of it. "Mr. Turner, Mrs. Foster," she greeted them using the fiction they'd maintained. "We've been expecting you." "It's Miss Foster, but," Marin corrected, then glanced at Caleb. "For now." Mrs. Walsh smiled. "Of course. And these must be our new students." She greeted each child by name, having memorized them from the telegram. She didn't flinch at their wariness, their damage, their too old eyes. She simply welcomed them like they were coming home. "Do we have to leave you?" Robert asked Marin, clinging to her skirt. Mrs. Walsh knelt down to his level. "Your teachers will be living here too. Mr. Turner will be our new groundskeeper and Miss Foster will be teaching. You'll see them every day." "Promise?" Robert demanded. "I promise," Mrs. Walsh said solemnly. They were given a small cottage on the grounds, 2 bedrooms and a common area. It wasn't much, but after weeks on the trail, it felt like a palace. The children were housed in the main building, but they could visit the cottage during free time. That first night after the children were settled in their dormitories, Caleb and Marin sat on the cottage's small porch watching the sun set over Sacramento. "We did it," Marin said, wonder in her voice. "We actually did it." "The kids did it," Caleb corrected. "We just helped." "No," she said firmly. "We all did it, together." A bell rang for evening prayers, and they could hear children's voices rising in song from the main building. 8 of those voices belonged to them now, in a way that legal papers could never define. "What happens now?" Marin asked. "Now we live," Caleb said. "Really live, not just survive." Together. He looked at her, this woman who'd walked into his life carrying impossible sorrow and had somehow turned it into impossible hope. "If you'll have me." "I'll have you," she said simply. 2 weeks later, they were married in the school's small chapel with 8 special children in the front row. Sarah was Marin's maid of honor. James was Caleb's best man, and Robert carried the rings on a pillow almost as big as he was. Lucy and Emma scattered flower petals with solemn concentration. The other children from the school filled the pews, making it a full and joyful ceremony. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Robert shouted, "Does this mean you're really our parents now?" The chapel erupted in laughter, but Marin answered seriously, "We've been your parents since the moment we decided you were worth fighting for." That night, after all the children were asleep, Caleb and Marin stood in their cottage, looking out at the school, where their 8 survivors were beginning to heal. "Do you think they'll be okay?" Marin asked. "Really okay?" "I think they'll be more than okay," Caleb said. "I think Elizabeth Hartley was right. They'll do important things." "How do you know?" "Because they've already done the most important thing. They survived. They kept their hearts soft despite having every reason to let them turn to stone. That's not just important, that's miraculous." The first winter at Mercy House tested them in ways the trail never had. Snow fell heavy on Sacramento that year, unusual for the climate, and with it came a different kind of cold that settled into bones and memories alike. The nightmares that had plagued the children on the trail didn't disappear with solid walls and regular meals. If anything, safety seemed to give their minds permission to finally process what they'd endured. It started with James waking the entire dormitory with his screaming 3 weeks after their arrival. Caleb found him curled in a corner, eyes wide but unseen, fighting off invisible attackers. The boy's fingernails had drawn blood from his own arms in his terror. "It's me, son," Caleb said softly, not touching him yet, knowing from his war days that sometimes touch made it worse. "You're safe. You're at the school. No one's going to hurt you." James blinked slowly, reality seeping back into his eyes. "Mr. Turner." "That's right. I'm here." The boy launched himself into Caleb's arms, then sobbing with the abandon of someone who'd held too much inside for too long. Other children were watching from their beds, some with understanding in their eyes, others with fear that their own nightmares might spill out so violently. "I thought they came back," James whispered. "I thought they were taking Emma again." "No one's taking anyone. Not while I'm here." But Caleb knew he couldn't be everywhere, couldn't guard against memories that attacked from inside. He carried James back to bed, sat with him until he fell asleep. then found Marin in their cottage, grading papers by lamplight. "It's getting worse," he said without preamble. She set down her pen. "I know. Lucy drew a picture today in art class. It was supposed to be her family home, but she drew it on fire with people inside. The other children were disturbed. What do? We be patient, we be consistent. We remind them every day that they're safe." "Is that enough?" Marin looked at him with eyes that had seen their own share of sorrow. "It has to be." But patience was hard when Robert started refusing to eat, convinced the food was poisoned. When Sarah began hoarding bread in her pillowcase, terrified of starving again. When Emma stopped drawing entirely, saying her pictures were too sad for anyone to see. Mrs. Walsh called a meeting after the third week of escalating behaviors. "This is normal," she assured them, though nothing about it felt normal. "These children have been through severe trauma. Now that they're safe, their minds are trying to process it." "They weren't like this on the trail," Marin protested. "They were in survival mode then. The danger was still real, still present. Their minds couldn't afford to process. Now they can, and it's overwhelming them." "So what do?" Caleb asked. "We create routine. We offer consistency. We don't punish the behaviors that come from trauma. And we wait." "For how long?" Mrs. Walsh's smile was sad but knowing. "For as long as it takes." The routine became their salvation. Every morning, Caleb would walk through the dormitories, greeting each child by name, reminding them through his presence that the night had passed safely. Marin would teach her classes with a steady calm that never wavered, even when Lucy burst into tears over a misplaced pencil, or when James got violent with another boy who accidentally bumped into him. Afternoons were for the garden. Caleb had started it as something to do with his hands, but the children gravitated toward it. There was something healing about putting seeds in the ground, watching them grow, creating life where there had been emptiness. Even Robert, still struggling with food, would eat tomatoes he'd grown himself. "Plants don't lie," he told Caleb one day, his small hands covered in soil. "They grow, or they don't, but they don't pretend." "People don't have to pretend either," Caleb said carefully. Robert considered this. "Sometimes they do. Sometimes pretending is how you stay alive." The wisdom in that 4-year-old voice broke Caleb's heart a little more. The first major crisis came on Christmas Eve. The school had organized a pageant with all the children participating. Their 8 were nervous but excited, having practiced their parts for weeks. Sarah was to sing a solo, her voice having recovered fully from her illness. James and another boy were the shepherds. Emma and Lucy were angels with wings Marin had sewn from old sheets and imagination. The evening started well. Parents and benefactors filled the small auditorium. The children performed their parts with endearing imperfection. Then, just as Sarah stepped forward for her solo, the door slammed open. A man stood there, clearly drunk, scanning the crowd. He was rough-looking, trail-worn, with eyes that held a particular kind of mien. Several people gasped, mothers pulling their children closer. "I heard," the man slurred, "that you got some of Briggs's brats here. Came to see if it was true." The room went silent except for the sound of Sarah's sharp intake of breath. On stage, the children who'd been at Perdition went rigid with fear. Emma started backing away. Lucy grabbed her sister's hand. James stepped in front of the younger children. Caleb was already moving, but the drunk man was closer to the stage. "There they are," he shouted, pointing. "The ones that cost me $500 when their rescue shut down our operation." He lunged toward the stage, and several things happened at once. Caleb tackled him from behind. Parents screamed and scrambled for exits. The children on stage scattered, some running, some freezing, and Sarah, brave Sarah, who'd led them through the mine shaft, stood her ground and started singing. Her voice rose clear and strong over the chaos, the Christmas hymn she'd practiced becoming something else, something defiant. One by one, the other children stopped running. Lucy joined her sister's song. Then Emma. Then James and Robert and the others. They stood together on that stage singing while Caleb and 2 other men wrestled the drunk outside. The man was arrested, thrown in jail to sober up. The pageant continued, though the audience was shaken. But something had shifted in the children that night. They'd faced their fear and chosen to sing through it. "You were brave tonight," Marin told them as she tucked them into bed later. "We weren't brave," Sarah corrected. "We were together. That's different." The winter passed slowly each day, a small victory against the darkness that wanted to claim these children. There were setbacks. Robert had to be watched constantly after they found him trying to run away, convinced bad men were coming. Emma started pulling out her own hair in her sleep. James got in so many fights that other parents complained. But there were triumphs, too. The first time Lucy laughed at something silly, really laughed, without checking first if it was safe. The morning Robert ate breakfast without checking if it was poisoned. The day Emma picked up her drawing pencils again and created something beautiful instead of horrific. Spring came early that year, and with it, unexpected visitors. A well-dressed couple arrived at the school asking to adopt. This wasn't unusual. Mercy House had a good reputation, and childless couples often came seeking to build families. What was unusual was their specific request. "We heard about the children from Perdition," the woman said. She was elegant, refined, with diamonds at her throat and sympathy in her eyes. "We'd like to adopt one of them." Mrs. Walsh handled it diplomatically, but Caleb felt rage building in his chest. These children weren't stories to be collected, weren't badges of charity to be worn. "Which one?" he asked, his voice harder than intended. "Well," the man said, uncomfortable with Caleb's tone. "We thought perhaps the youngest. Robert, we heard he's an orphan." "They're all orphans," Marin said quietly. "But they're also a family. They survived together. They healed together. You can't just take one." "Surely that's not practical," the woman protested. 8 children need individual homes, individual attention." "No," Sarah said from the doorway where she'd been listening. "We need each other." She walked into the room, all 13 years of her carrying more authority than her age should allow. Behind her, the other children filed in, having sensed something important was happening. "We won't be separated," Sarah continued. "Not again. Never again." The couple left offended and confused. Mrs. Walsh started to scold the children for eavesdropping, but Caleb stopped her. "They're right," he said. "These 8 stay together one way or another." "That's not how adoption works," Mrs. Walsh said gently. "Children need families, not institutions." "Then we'll adopt them," Marin said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her. "All of them." "Caleb and I will adopt all 8. The room went silent. The children stared at her with expressions of hope so naked it was painful to witness. "That's irregular," Mrs. Walsh said carefully. 8 children is a tremendous responsibility." "We're already responsible for them," Caleb said, finding his voice. "Have been since Perdition. This would just make it official." "You'd need a larger home, more income. The state has requirements." "Then we'll meet them," Marin interrupted. "Whatever it takes." Robert walked over to Caleb, looked up at him with those 2 old eyes. "Really?" he whispered. "You'd be our real father." Caleb knelt down to meet his eyes. "I've been your real father since the day I decided you were worth saving. This would just be paperwork." One by one, the children moved closer, forming a circle around Caleb and Marin, not touching yet, still too damaged for easy affection, but present, connected choosing. "It would take months," Mrs. Walsh warned. "Maybe longer. The state will investigate, interview, demand proof you can provide." "We'll wait," Sarah said for all of them. The legal process was indeed lengthy and invasive. State officials came to observe, to question, to doubt. They interviewed each child separately, looking for signs of coercion or abuse. They examined Caleb and Marin's finances, their backgrounds, their marriage. One particular official, a stern man named Garrett, seemed determined to find reasons to deny the adoption. "Mr. Turner," he said, during one interview, "you're a 52-year-old man with a history of isolation and violence. Why should the state trust you with 8 traumatized children?" "Because I understand trauma," Caleb replied steadily. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything and have to rebuild. Because I've already proven I'll die for these children if necessary." "That's very dramatic, but the state needs more than dramatic gestures." "Then look at the children," Marin interjected. "Look at how they've improved since we arrived. Look at their school records, their health, their happiness. We're not asking you to trust us. We're asking you to trust the evidence." Garrett did look at the evidence, spending weeks observing the children in their daily routines. He watched Caleb teaching James to whittle patient with the boys shaking hands. He saw Marion working with Emma on her reading. never frustrated when the girl's trauma made concentration difficult. He observed family dinners where 8 children and 2 adults navigated the complex dynamics of chosen family with grace and growing love. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Lucy Chen had been keeping a journal, something Marin had encouraged for all the children as a way to process their experiences. She showed it to Garrett one day unprompted. "Read this," she said simply. The journal was heartbreaking and beautiful. In careful English mixed with occasional Chinese characters, Lucy had documented their journey from perdition to Mercy House. But more than that, she'd documented the slow return of hope. She wrote about Caleb checking on them every night, even when he thought they were asleep. About Marin singing lullabies she'd learned just for them. About feeling safe for the first time since the bad men came. One entry stood out. "Today Robert called Mr. Turner Papa by accident. Mr. Turner cried. I pretended not to see, but I saw. That's when I knew we were really family. Real fathers cry for their children." Garrett closed the journal, cleared his throat. "I'll recommend approval," he said quietly. The adoption was finalized on a Tuesday in May, almost exactly a year after that terrible night at perdition. The judge, an elderly woman with kind eyes, made each child stand and state their wishes for the record. "Do you want to be adopted by Caleb and Marin Turner, she asked each one. 8 times the answer was yes. 8 times voices that had once screamed in terror now spoke words of choosing, of belonging. "Then, by the power vested in me by the state of California, I declare you a family," the judge said. And if her voice caught slightly on the last word, no one mentioned it. They celebrated at a restaurant in Sacramento, a fancy place that made the children uncomfortable with its white tablecloths and multiple forks. Robert spilled soup on his new shirt. James knocked over a water glass. Emma got hiccups from trying not to laugh. "We don't belong here," Sarah whispered to Marin, embarrassed. "We belong wherever we are," Marin replied. "Together." But belonging was still a process, not an event. The legal adoption didn't erase nightmares or heal all wounds. There were still bad days, terrible days when the past reached out with cold fingers to drag them backward. Like the day 6 months later when a letter arrived at the school. It was addressed to Caleb, no return address, postmarked from Mexico. Inside was a single line, "You took what was mine, I'll take what's yours." Caleb showed it to Mrs. Walsh but kept it from Marin and the children. He started carrying his gun again, watching shadows, checking locks. Some of Briggs's men had escaped to Mexico, and while most were probably glad to be free of that life, there were always some who nursed grudges like wounded animals. 3 days after the letter arrived, Emma went missing. It was during afternoon recess. One moment she was drawing under the oak tree, the next she was gone. Her sketch pad lay abandoned, a half-finished horse with impossibly long legs waiting for her return. The panic was immediate and total. Teachers searched the grounds. Caleb rode out looking for tracks. Marin stood in the yard calling Emma's name until her voice went hoarse. The other 7 children huddled together, eyes wide with resurging terror. "They took her," Robert whispered. "The bad men came back and took her." "We don't know that," Sarah said, but her voice shook. The police were called. Search parties organized. As the sun set with no sign of Emma, Caleb felt the old darkness rising in him, the violent thing he'd kept caged for so long. If someone had taken her, if someone had dared to touch one of his children, it was James who found her, or rather who figured out where she was. "The mine," he said, suddenly grabbing Caleb's arm. "She talked about it yesterday. Said she wondered if it was like the one at Perdition." There was an old abandoned mine 2 miles from the school, boarded up and supposedly sealed. But children had a way of finding ways in where adults saw only barriers. They found Emma deep in the mine, curled in a ball, her dress torn from squeezing through gaps in the boards. She was unhurt physically, but lost in her mind back in that terrible night when they'd fled through darkness with death behind them. "I wanted to see if I could do it again," she whispered when Marin finally coaxed words from her. "If I could be brave like before. But I couldn't. I got scared, and then I got lost, and then I couldn't breathe, and—" "Shh," Marin soothed, holding her close. "You don't have to be brave like that anymore. That kind of brave was for that time. Now you can be different brave." "What kind?" "The kind where you ask for help when you're scared. The kind where you trust us to keep you safe." The incident with the mine led to new rules, new structures, but also new understanding. These children would always carry perdition with them, not as a weight, but as a part of their story. The goal wasn't to forget, but to integrate to build new chapters that honored the old without being imprisoned by them. They moved out of Mercy House that summer into a large farmhouse on the outskirts of Sacramento. It had 10 bedrooms, sprawling grounds, and a barn that Caleb immediately envisioned as a workshop. The down payment came from an unexpected source. The federal government had seized Briggs's assets and distributed compensation to the victims' families. It wasn't much per child, but pooled together it was enough for a start. "Our house," Robert said in wonder, running from room to room. "Our real house." They painted each child's room the color of their choosing. Sarah picked deep blue like the evening sky. James wanted green like forests. Emma chose yellow, bright, and unashamed. Lucy selected purple, royal, and bold. Robert, after much deliberation, chose orange because it's happy. The first night in the new house, they all ended up in the living room anyway, sleeping bags spread on the floor, unwilling to separate even into different rooms. Caleb and Marin lay with them, this family forged from tragedy, but held together by choice. "Tell us a story." Robert requested his usual nighttime plea. Usually Marin told fairy tales or adventures, but tonight Caleb spoke. "Once upon a time," he began, "there was a man who thought his life was over. He lived alone for so many years he forgot what other voices sounded like. Then one day a woman arrived at his door carrying a terrible burden and a desperate hope. The children listened, recognizing their own story, but hearing it new transformed into something mythic. The man could have turned away," Caleb continued, "could have kept his silence and solitude, but something in him remembered what it was like to fight for something that mattered. So he stood up. He strapped on his guns. And he went to war against the darkness." "Did he win?" Robert asked, though he knew the answer. "He did, but not alone. He had help from a brave woman who wouldn't give up, from children who were stronger than anyone knew, from strangers who chose kindness when they could have chosen indifference. Together, they won." "What happened after?" Lucy asked. "After is now," Caleb said. "After is this house, this family, this chance to write new stories. After is tomorrow, and the next day, and all the days we get to be together." "I like after," Emma said sleepily. "Me too," Caleb agreed. As the children drifted off to sleep, Marin reached over and took his hand. "That was a good story. It's not finished yet." "No," she agreed, "but it's a good chapter." The seasons turned, and with them the children grew. Sarah started high school, brilliant in her studies, but still careful in her trust. James discovered a love of medicine that went beyond his childhood play, spending hours reading medical texts Caleb found for him. Emma's art evolved from therapeutic to beautiful, her horses gaining proper proportions but keeping their sense of freedom. Lucy became the family storyteller, weaving tales that mixed Chinese folklore with American frontier myths. Robert, youngest but in some ways oldest in soul, became their protector, always watching for danger, even as he slowly learned to play. There were 3 more children who joined them that year, not from perdition, but from other traumas, other losses. The house expanded to hold them, the family grew to embrace them. Caleb built additional rooms, Marin sewed more clothes, and the original 8 taught the new 3 how to survive, how to heal, how to belong. One evening, as Caleb sat on the porch watching his 13 children play in the yard, Marin sat beside him. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked. "When I collapsed on your porch, every day. Do you regret it?" He looked at her, this woman who'd become his wife, his partner, his reason. He looked at the children, laughing and arguing and living with the full-throated intensity of those who knew how precious life was. "The only thing I regret," he said, "is those 23 years I wasted before you arrived." They weren't wasted. They were preparation. For what? For this? For being strong enough to act when action was needed, for having room in your heart for all of this love. As if summoned by her words, Robert ran over and climbed into Caleb's lap, still small for his age, but growing. "Papa James says there's no such thing as dragons, but there are all kinds of dragons," Caleb told him. Some breathe fire, some steal children, some live in our minds. But you know what? What? We're dragon slayers, every one of us. We've proven it. Robert considered this seriously, then nodded. We are, aren't we? He jumped down and ran back to the others, shouting, Papa says we're dragon slayers. The children took up the cry, running around the yard with stick swords, battling invisible monsters. But Caleb noticed they fought together, protecting each other, making sure no one faced their dragons alone. As the sun set over Sacramento, painting the sky in shades of hope, Caleb thought about cycles and choices, about the moments that define a life. He'd lost his first family to nature's cruelty, spent decades in self-imposed exile, then found his purpose in the most unlikely way through a barefoot woman carrying bloodied shoes and impossible hope. The letter from Mexico had been the last they'd heard from Briggs's remaining men. Maybe they'd given up, moved on, found other darknesses to serve, or maybe they were planning something waiting. Caleb stayed vigilant, but he no longer lived in fear. He had too much to protect now, too much to lose, but also too much strength to draw from. That night, as every night he walked through the house, checking locks, looking in on sleeping children. Each room held a child who'd faced unimaginable horror and chosen to keep their hearts soft. Each breath in the darkness was a small victory against those who would steal innocence. He found Marin in their room, writing in her journal. She'd been documenting their story, she said, so the children would have it when they were older, when they might doubt their own memories or their own strength. What are you writing tonight, Pitu? He asked. About today. About Robert deciding we're dragon slayers. About Emma painting that mural on the barn. About James helping that injured bird. About all the small moments that add up to a life rebuilt. Is it a happy story? She looked up at him, and in her eyes he saw their whole journey, the terror and trauma, yes, but also the triumph. The children, they'd saved the family. They'd built the love they'd found in the ashes of loss. It's a true story, she said, which means it's both heartbreaking and beautiful. Like life. Exactly like life. They turned out the lamp, settled into bed, listened to the old house settling around them with its cargo of sleeping children. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Sarah was having nightmares again as the anniversary of perdition approached. James had been in another fight at school. Emma still sometimes disappeared into herself, lost in memories they couldn't quite reach. But tomorrow would also bring Robert's laughter, Lucy's stories, small hands reaching for comfort and finding it. Tomorrow would bring another day of choosing to be a family, of proving that love could grow in the most unlikely soil. Caleb, Marin whispered in the darkness. Yeah. We did good, didn't we? He pulled her closer. This woman who'd walked into his life carrying death and had somehow helped him choose life. We did good, he agreed. Outside, a night bird called its voice, carrying across the California darkness. It sounded like hope. The morning Robert disappeared, 10 years had passed since perdition. He was 14 now, no longer the terrified 4-year-old who'd asked Marin to be his mama. The other children had grown too. Sarah was 23, married to a doctor she'd met at college, pregnant with her first child. James had just started medical school. Emma was teaching art at Mercy House, giving back to the place that had saved them. Lucy had become a journalist, writing stories that mattered. The 3 younger children they'd taken in were thriving in their own ways. But Robert had always been different. The youngest from perdition, the most damaged, the one who'd seen too much before he had words to describe it. As he grew, the trauma didn't fade. It evolved, transformed, found new ways to surface. Caleb discovered his empty bed at dawn when he made his usual rounds. The window was open, sheets tied together in a makeshift rope, a technique they'd taught him for fire safety that he'd turned to escape. On his pillow was a note in Robert's careful handwriting. I'm going back. I need to see it. I need to know it's really over. Don't follow me. I love you. R. Marin's scream when Caleb showed her the note could have shattered glass. It was the sound of a mother's worst fear, realized the same sound she'd made that day in Colton's Crossing when they'd taken Emma and James. He's going to perdition, she gasped, already pulling on clothes. That damned place. We should have burned it all, salted the earth, made sure nothing remained. We don't know that's where. Where else? It's the anniversary, Caleb. 10 years exactly. He's been talking about it for weeks, asking questions about that night. She was right. Robert had been fixated lately, pressing them for details they'd tried to spare him. What exactly happened in the canyon? How many men died? Did any escape? Were they sure, absolutely sure that Briggs was dead? "I'll go after him," Caleb said, already reaching for his rifle, the same one he'd carried that night kept oiled and ready because old habits died hard. "We'll go after him," Marin corrected. "The other children are old enough to manage. Emma's here for the week. She can watch the younger ones." They were on horseback within an hour, following the route Robert would have taken. He had maybe 6 hours head start, but he was on foot. They could catch him before he reached that cursed place. As they rode, Caleb's mind went back to another desperate ride 10 years ago, when they'd headed toward perdition the first time. Marin beside him, then too, both of them thinking they were probably riding to their deaths. Now they were riding to save their son from his own ghosts. "Why now?" Marin asked as they stopped to water the horses. "Why return now?" "He's the age when boys think they need to prove themselves," Caleb said. "Prove they're men." "He doesn't need to prove anything. We know that. But Robert's always felt like he had to earn his place, earn his survival, like he needed to justify why he lived when others didn't." They found evidence of Robert's passage footprints in dust, a candy wrapper from the supplies he'd taken, marks where he'd stopped to rest. He was making good time for a 14-year-old city boy, but then Robert had always been stronger than he looked, steel wrapped in skin that seemed too fragile for what it contained. They were a day out from perdition when they found the blood, just drops at first on rocks beside the trail, then more suggesting injury, suggesting struggle. Marin made a sound like a wounded animal, but Caleb forced himself to think tactically. The blood was fresh, maybe 2 hours old. The trail suggested Robert had fallen, maybe twisted an ankle, but had kept going. "Stubborn boy," Caleb muttered, though there was pride mixed with his fear. They pushed harder horses lathered with sweat, and finally saw smoke rising in the distance. Not the smoke of a wildfire or a camp, but something deliberate, controlled. Someone was burning something in the ruins of perdition. They approached carefully, leaving the horses and continuing on foot, Caleb's rifle ready. The canyon looked different than it had 10 years ago weather, and time had collapsed more structures, vegetation had begun reclaiming the ground. But the bones of the place were still there, including the metal framework of the cage where the children had been kept. And standing in front of that cage, feeding papers into a fire, was Robert. He wasn't alone. 3 men stood with him, but they weren't threatening him. They were watching him, and as Caleb and Marin crept closer, they could hear voices. "You sure you want to know?" one of the men was saying. He was older, scarred, missing his left arm below the elbow. "Some truths are better left buried." "I need to know," Robert replied. His voice steady despite the tears on his face. "I need to know why I survived when my parents didn't." Caleb recognized the one-armed man, then one of Briggs's guards from that night, one who'd been shot but not killed in the chaos. He started to raise his rifle, but Marin caught his arm. "Wait," she whispered. "Listen." The one-armed man pulled out a leather journal, worn and water-stained. "This was Briggs's, found it in the ruins after. Your parents, their names were Michael and Ruth Price. They owned a small farm outside Colton's Crossing." "I know that part," Robert said impatiently. "What you don't know is that your father stood up to Briggs first, before anyone else had the courage. Briggs came demanding his tax, and your father refused, said he'd die before he'd fund child slavery." Robert's hands clenched at his sides. And Briggs killed him. Right there in front of your mother and you. You were barely walking, couldn't have been more than 2. Your mother tried to fight, and Briggs..." The man paused clearly, struggling with the memory. "Briggs decided to make an example. Took you both. Your mother died trying to protect you during the transport to perdition. Threw herself at Briggs knowing she'd die buying time for one of the other guards to grab you to hide you with the other children." "Which guard?" Robert asked, his voice barely a whisper. The one-armed man raised his stump. "Lost this trying to stop Briggs from killing you too. He said a baby was useless, couldn't work, would just be a burden. I said a baby could be sold for good money to the right people. It was the only argument that worked with him. You saved me to sell me. I saved you to save you. The selling was just the excuse." The man looked older than his years, worn down by a decade of carrying this knowledge. I've been coming back here every anniversary hoping, I don't know, hoping to find some way to make amends. When I saw you today, recognized you from the drawings in Briggs's journal. He held out the journal to Robert. Everything's in here. All his deals, all his victims, all his sins. I thought about burning it 100 times, but couldn't. Felt like burning it would be forgetting them. Robert took the journal with shaking hands. Why didn't you stop him sooner? Because I was a coward, the man said simply. Because I told myself I was just following orders. Because I didn't think one man could make a difference. One man did, Robert said, and Caleb realized with a start that the boy was talking about him. My father, my other father, he made a difference. Turner, the one-armed man's face changed. Caleb Turner's your father now. Has been for 10 years. The man actually smiled, a twisted thing on his scarred face. Good. That's good. He's the kind of father you deserve, the kind who'd burn down hell itself for his children. He did, Robert said. He burned down perdition. And I helped it burn, the man admitted. After he left with you kids, after Briggs was dead, some of us who'd been too scared to resist finally found our spines. We made sure this place could never be used again. Caleb had heard enough. He stepped out from cover rifle raised but not aimed. Robert, the boy spun around his face, cycling through surprise, guilt, and relief. Papa? Time to come home, son. The three men tensed, recognizing Caleb, remembering that night. The one-armed man stepped forward, putting himself between Caleb and the others. Mr. Turner, we're not here for trouble. Then why are you here? Same as the boy, trying to make sense of something senseless, trying to find absolution for the unforgivable. Marin emerged then, and her presence changed everything. The mother energy she radiated was more dangerous than any weapon. She walked straight to Robert, grabbed his face in her hands, studied him for injuries. You're hurt, she said, noticing his wrapped ankle. I fell. It's nothing. It's not nothing. Nothing is ever nothing with you. She pulled him into a fierce embrace. Don't you ever run away again. Do you understand me? Yes, Mama. She turned to the three men, and they actually stepped back from the force of her gaze. You were here that night. Yes, ma'am, the one-armed man answered. You participated in taking children. Yes, ma'am. Give me one reason why I shouldn't let my husband shoot you where you stand. The man considered this. I don't have one, except maybe that your son needs to hear the whole truth, and we're the only ones left who can tell it. We know the truth. You know what happened. You don't know why. You don't know how Briggs built his network, who bought the children where they ended up. Some of them might still be alive, might still need finding. That stopped Marin cold. In all the years since they'd assumed the children who'd been sold were lost forever. But if there were records... This journal, she said slowly, it has names, locations, everything. The one-armed man confirmed. Briggs was many things, but he was meticulous about business. Robert held out the journal to his parents. We could find them. We could bring them home. Caleb lowered his rifle completely. Why now? He asked the men. Why reveal this now? Because the boy deserved to know about his real parents, the one-armed man said. Because we're tired of carrying this alone. Because maybe, just maybe, doing one right thing might balance against all the wrong we did. It doesn't, Marin said flatly. No, the man agreed. But it's what we have. They spent the rest of the day in that ruined place going through Briggs's journal together. It was worse than they'd imagined, a network spreading across 3 states, children sold as far away as San Francisco and Denver. Names, dates, prices paid. The banality of evil reduced to ledger entries. 47 children totals, Robert said, having done the math. Over 3 years. 8 rescued from here, Caleb added, leaving 39 unaccounted for. Some will be dead, the one-armed man said bluntly. The mines were dangerous and Briggs didn't sell to kind people. But some might be alive, Robert insisted. Some might still need help. Caleb and Marin exchanged looks. They were in their 60s now, not the same people who'd ridden to war against Briggs a decade ago. But looking at their son's face, at the determination there, they knew this wasn't over. We'd need help, Marin said finally. Law enforcement resources, a network of our own. Sarah's husband has connections, Robert said eagerly. And Lucy's newspaper could investigate. James knows doctors in 3 cities who might have treated injured children. Emma knows every orphanage in California. You've thought about this, Caleb observed. I've thought about nothing else for weeks. Why do you think I came here? I knew there had to be records. Briggs was too proud of his evil not to document it. The one-armed man stood. We'll help if you'll let us. We know some of the buyers know their habits, their locations. It's the least we can do. The very least, Marin agreed coldly. As the sun began to set, they made a strange procession, leaving Perdition, Caleb, and Marin on horseback. Robert riding double with his mother, the 3 former guards walking. The journal was tucked safely in Caleb's saddlebag, its terrible secrets waiting to be transformed into rescue missions. Are you angry? Robert asked his parents as they made camp that night. Yes, Marin said immediately. Terrified, Caleb added. You could have been killed, or taken, or lost. But I needed to know. No, Caleb corrected. You needed us. You needed to trust us with your questions, your pain. That's what family does. Robert was quiet for a moment. My birth parents died fighting Briggs. Yes. That makes us connected. All of us who survived him, who fought him, who lost to him. We're all connected. Is that why you want to find the others? The sold children. Partly, but mostly because you taught me that's what we do. We save the ones who need saving. Marin reached over and squeezed his hand. When did you become so wise? I had good teachers. The 3 former guards had made their own camp a respectful distance away, but close enough for protection if needed. It was strange being allied with men who'd once been enemies, but Caleb had learned that redemption came in unexpected forms. What will you do with them? Marin asked quietly, nodding toward the men. Use them, Caleb said pragmatically. They have information we need. After that, he shrugged. That's between them and their consciences. The one-armed man saved Robert, 10 years too late. But still, they returned to Sacramento 3 days later to find the house in chaos. Emma had indeed watched the younger children, but she'd also called Sarah James and Lucy. All of them had converged on the house, terrified about Robert's disappearance. You stupid, selfish boy! Sarah raged, hormonal from pregnancy and fierce with fear. We thought you were dead. I'm sorry, Robert said, and he looked it. I didn't think... No, you didn't. James interrupted, medical bag in hand, like he'd been prepared to treat injuries. You just ran off to face your demons alone, like we haven't spent 10 years teaching you that we face demons together. Lucy, ever the journalist, had already noticed the journal. What's that? So they told them. Everything. The records, the network, the possibility of finding more survivors. The room went silent as the weight of it settled. 39 children, Emma whispered. After 10 years. They'd be adults now mostly, Lucy said, her mind already working. Teenagers to 20s, if they survived. We have to try it, Robert said. Don't we? Sarah placed her hand on her swollen belly. I'm about to bring a child into this world. How can I do that knowing there are others out there who might still need saving? It would be dangerous, James warned. The people who bought these children won't want to be exposed. Then we expose them anyway, Lucy said with professional determination. Publicly. Make it impossible for them to hide. Caleb looked at these children, his children who'd grown into adults with steel spines and soft hearts. They'd learned the lesson of perdition not as trauma to hide from, but as a call to action. If we do this, he said slowly, we do it right. Legal channels where possible, other means where necessary. We protect ourselves, and we protect each other. Like always, Robert said. Like always, Marin agreed. They spent the next weeks planning, researching, reaching out carefully to law enforcement contacts. Sarah's husband, Daniel, proved invaluable. His medical connections included doctors who'd treated suspicious injuries in young workers. Lucy's editor agreed to investigate, smelling a story that could change laws. James used his medical school network to trace children who might have been sold as servants to wealthy families. The first breakthrough came from an unexpected source, the one-armed man whose name they learned was Carl. He'd been camped outside Sacramento waiting and approached Caleb one morning. "There's a girl," he said without preamble. "One Briggs sold to a mining operation near Nevada City. I saw her 6 months ago working in a boarding house. She'd be about 17 now." "You're sure it was her?" "She had a birthmark on her neck shaped like a butterfly. It's in Briggs's notes. Rebecca Thornton taken from a wagon train when she was 7. "And you just happened to see her?" Carl's face was grim. "I've been looking. For 10 years I've been looking, trying to, I don't know, find them, make sure they're alive. It doesn't make up for anything, but it's something," Caleb finished. They went to Nevada City. Caleb, Marin, and Lucy, who posed as a journalist doing a story on mining town boarding houses. They found Rebecca exactly where Carl had said, serving meals to miners with dead eyes and mechanical movements. The birthmark was unmistakable. "Rebecca," Marin said softly when they managed to get her alone. The young woman froze. "Nobody calls me that." "It's your name. Rebecca Thornton. Your parents were Elizabeth and John Thornton. You had a brother named Pete." Rebecca's face crumbled. "They said my family was dead. Said I had no one. They lied." It took 2 days to extract Rebecca from her situation. The boarding house owner had papers, allegedly legal adoption documents, but Lucy's newspaper contacts quickly proved they were forged. The threat of exposure was enough. Rebecca left with them, 17 years old and finally free. "Are there others, Saul?" she asked as they rode back to Sacramento. "Other children he sold." "We're finding out," Marin told her. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. "There were 3 other girls with me originally. They split us up in Denver, but I heard one ended up in San Francisco, Chinese girl about my age. Do you remember her name?" "She called herself Lily, but that wasn't her real name. She had a scar on her palm from trying to escape." Another lead, another thread in the tapestry of stolen children. Rebecca stayed with them while she figured out her next steps. Her parents were indeed dead, had died searching for her. They learned, but she had an aunt in Boston who'd never stopped hoping. "Will you go to her?" Marin asked. "I don't know who I am anymore," Rebecca admitted. "I'm not the 7-year-old she lost." "No," Marin agreed. "But you're the 17-year-old she could love." Robert spent hours with Rebecca, sharing his own story, his own struggles with identity and belonging. They were different. He'd been saved early. She'd endured a decade of servitude, but they understood each other in ways others couldn't. "It gets better," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch. I don't know, but it does. The nightmares fade. Not completely, but enough. And you learn that what happened to you isn't who you are. What if it is? Then you get to decide what to do with it. You can let it destroy you, or you can let it forge you into something stronger. Like your family did." Robert smiled. "We're still figuring it out, but we're doing it together." One success led to another. The network of information expanded. James found 2 boys who'd been sold as farm labor, now young men who'd never been taught to read. Emma discovered 3 girls in a San Francisco orphanage, abandoned there when they'd grown too old to be useful. Lucy's newspaper articles sparked official investigations leading to more discoveries. Not all the stories had happy endings. They found graves, 2 small markers in mining town cemeteries, records of children who died in cave-ins, or from disease, or from simple neglect. Each one was documented, each name recorded in a new ledger Marin kept, not of evil transactions, but of lives remembered. 6 months into their search, they'd found 14 survivors. Some, like Rebecca, were able to reconnect with distant family. Others, with no one left, formed their own small community in Sacramento. Caleb and Marin's house became a way station, a place of healing and planning. Carl and the other 2 guards continued to help, providing information and leads. They never asked for forgiveness, never tried to minimize their role. They simply worked as if labor could somehow atone for past sins. "Why do you trust them?" Robert asked Caleb one day, watching Carl repair a fence. "I don't trust them," Caleb corrected, "but I use them. There's a difference. They seem like they're really trying to help. Maybe they are, but helping now doesn't erase what they did then. Doesn't it count for something?" Caleb considered his son, this boy who'd seen the worst of humanity but still looked for good. "It counts. but not enough to balance the scales. Some scales can't be balanced, only acknowledged. That's sad. That's life. But you know what else is life, the 14 people we've found? The families reunited, the futures reclaimed. That counts too. The work continued. Sarah had her baby, a daughter she named Hope, and even from her recovery bed was coordinating rescue efforts. James graduated medical school and set up a practice specifically for survivors of trauma. Emma started an art therapy program. Lucy won a journalism award for her exposure of the child trafficking network. Robert, now 15, had become the unofficial liaison between the survivors, the one who could speak to their shared experience while also showing them possibility. He was considering law school, talking about becoming a prosecutor, someone who could fight evil within the system instead of outside it. "You'd be good at it," Marin told him one evening as they went through more of Briggs's records. "I want to be more than good. I want to be devastating to people like Briggs." "That's a lot of anger to carry." "It's not anger," Robert said thoughtfully. "It's purpose. You and Papa taught me that. That sometimes the worst things that happen to us can become the reason we do the best things for others." Caleb, listening from the doorway, felt a pride so fierce it almost hurt. This boy who'd arrived at 4 years old, traumatized beyond words, had become a young man of purpose and compassion.